Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Harold Thompson, but everyone calls me Hal. I've been a forest ranger for 11 years now, started back in 1955 right after I got my biology degree from Ohio State. People think being a ranger is all about putting out fires and telling campers to clean up their trash, but my real job is watching the wildlife. I keep track of every bird, every migration pattern, every change in the forest. I know this sounds like bragging, but I've cataloged 247 different bird species in Wayne National Forest. I can tell you when the red-winged blackbirds will start heading south, down to the day. I know the sound a great blue heron makes when it's scared versus when it's hunting. After 15 years of watching birds, I thought I'd seen everything that could fly through these woods. I was wrong. The Ohio River Valley where I work is a strange place. It sits right on the border between Ohio and West Virginia, near a little town called Point Pleasant. The river bottomland is always foggy, especially in November when the cold fronts start rolling in. There aren't many people living out here, just a few farms scattered between the trees and the old earthworks left behind by whatever Indians lived here hundreds of years ago. Most folks don't know that a big battle happened here back in 1774. Chief Cornstalk and his warriors fought the Virginia militia right where the river bends. My grandmother used to say the ground still remembers all that blood. I never put much stock in her ghost stories, but I'll admit the place feels different sometimes, especially when the fog rolls in thick. That's exactly what was happening on November 15th, 1966, when everything started going wrong. I was doing my regular evening bird count near the river when I heard the radio crackling in my truck. Dispatch was trying to raise me, which was unusual for this time of day. Ranger Thompson, we've go. Had some folks wanting to report they say they saw something flying around out your way. I grabbed the handset. What kind of something, dispatch? They say it was huge, Hal. Bigger than any bird they ever seen. Had glowing red eyes, too. I know it sounds crazy, but these are good people. The Rogers couple from Point Pleasant. They seemed real shook up. I sighed and looked out at the thick fog settling over the river. I'll check it out, dispatch. Probably just a great blue heron. They look pretty big when you catch them in your headlights. But even as I said it, I felt something cold crawl up my spine. I'd seen plenty of night herons over the years, and I'd never known one to shake anybody up that bad. I drove my truck down the old logging road toward where the Rogers said they'd seen whatever it was. The fog was getting thicker, and my headlights barely cut through it. I rolled down the windows to listen for bird calls. That's usually the first sign that something big is moving through the area. Birds don't like surprises. What I heard instead was nothing. Complete, total silence. In 11 years of working these woods, I'd never heard quiet like that. No owl calls, no rustling in the underbrush, no insects buzzing. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring with phantom sounds, like when you're in a house right before a bad storm hits. I stopped the truck and got out, grabbing my binoculars and flashlight. The fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. I called out, "Hello? Anyone out here?" My voice seemed to disappear into the mist like it was being swallowed. That's when I saw the first dead bird. It was lying right in the middle of the road. A red-winged blackbird, perfectly intact. No wounds, no blood, just dead. I knelt down to examine it with my flashlight. The bird's eyes were wide open, staring straight up at the sky like it had been looking at something when it died. I stood up and swept my flashlight beam around. More dead birds. Dozens of them, all different species. Robins, sparrows, even a few crows. They were arranged in a perfect circle about 20 feet across, all of them staring up at the same patch of sky. My hands started shaking as I counted them. 43 dead birds, all positioned like they'd been placed there by hand. Birds don't die like this. They don't arrange themselves in patterns, and they certainly don't all drop dead at the same time for no reason. I was still staring at the circle of dead birds when I heard it. a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. It started low, almost below the range of human hearing, then rose to a humming noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The fog started swirling, forming little whirlpools in the air. And then, just for a second, I saw two red lights floating about 7 feet off the ground, maybe 50 yards away through the fog. They weren't reflecting my flashlight beam. They were glowing on their own, bright red like the coals in a fire. They hung there for maybe 3 seconds, and I swear I felt them looking right at me, looking into me. Then they were gone. I ran back to my truck and slammed the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Thompson. I need you to call the state police. We've got something out here." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red lights floating in the fog. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was just my imagination, maybe a couple of reflectors on a fence post, or the tail lights of a car I hadn't heard through the fog. But I couldn't explain away the dead birds. I drove back to the spot as soon as the sun came up. The fog had cleared, and I could see the river valley stretching out below me, beautiful and peaceful in the morning light. For a moment, I felt stupid for getting so spooked the night before. Then I looked down the road. The birds were still there, but they'd been moved. Instead of one big circle, they were now arranged in 3 smaller circles, like someone had been playing with them during the night. And in the center of each circle, scratched into the dirt road, was a symbol that looked almost like a bird with its wings spread wide. I took pictures with my camera, then gathered up all the dead birds in a canvas sack. I figured the state veterinarian might be able to tell me what killed them. Over the next 3 days, more reports came in. The Rogers couple called again. They'd seen the red lights hovering over their barn. A farmer named Jenkins found all his chickens huddled in the corner of their coop, too scared to come out even for food. Mary Patterson, who lived alone about 2 miles from where I'd found the birds, called to say something had been walking around her house all night, but when she looked out her windows, nothing was there. I started spending more time in the woods, trying to figure out what was happening. That's my job, after all, to know what's going on with the wildlife. But the more I looked, the stranger things got. All the migratory birds that should have been passing through had disappeared. The trees that should have been full of sparrows and finches settling in for the night were empty and quiet. Even the year-round residents, the cardinals and blue jays that never left, seemed to have vanished into thin air. It was like every bird for miles around had decided to flee all at once. On the 4th day, I was checking the area around the old Indian earthworks when I found the feathers. They were stuck in a thorn bush about 8 feet off the ground, too high for any normal bird to have left them. I climbed up and carefully pulled them free. They were huge, bigger than any bird feather I'd ever seen, even from the great blue herons. The color was, as wrong too, a dark, iridescent gray that seemed to shift and change when I moved them in the sunlight. I measured them when I got back to the ranger station. The longest one was 14 inches. For comparison, the biggest feather from a great blue heron, the largest bird in our area, is about 8 inches. These feathers could only have come from something with a wingspan of at least 15 feet. That night, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I kept looking up the measurements for every large bird in North America, trying to find something that matched. Turkey vultures, bald eagles, even the massive California condors. None of them were big enough to produce feathers like the ones I'd found. I was still at my desk, surrounded by bird books and field guides, when the phone rang at almost midnight. "Ranger Thompson?" The voice was shaky, scared. "This is Tom Jenkins. You know, the farmer out on Route 62? "What's wrong, Tom?" "It's here. That thing everyone's been talking about, it's in my field right now." I could hear his breathing, quick and shallow. "Are you sure, Tom? What does it look like?" "It's... Jesus, I don't know how to describe it. It looks like a man, but bigger. 7 feet tall, maybe 8. And it's got wings, Hal. Huge wings, like a bat, but covered in feathers. It's just standing there in my cornfield, not moving." My mouth went dry. "Where are you now, Tom?" I'm looking out my kitchen window. It's maybe 100 yards away. And Hal, its eyes are glowing red, just like everyone said. I was already grabbing my keys and flashlight. I'm on my way. Don't go outside, Tom. Stay in the house until I get there. I made the 10-minute drive to Jenkins's farm in about 6 minutes, my truck bouncing over the dirt road as fast as I dared to push it. His farmhouse sat on a hill overlooking about 40 acres of cornfield. I could see lights on in every window. I parked next to his front porch and knocked on the door. Tom Jenkins answered immediately. He'd been waiting right behind it. He was a big man, spent his whole life farming, but hush-heaped. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "Is it still out there?" I asked. He nodded toward the back of the house. "Kitchen window. But Hal, I think it knows we're watching it." I followed him through his house to the kitchen. His wife was sitting at the table, clutching a cup of coffee with both hands. She looked up at me with scared eyes. "It's been there for almost an hour," she whispered, "just standing there, looking at the house." I stepped up to the window and looked out at the cornfield. At first I didn't see anything. The field was silver in the moonlight, row after row of corn stalks swaying gently in the night breeze. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw it. It was standing perfectly still about halfway across the field, just like Tom had said. Even from 100 yards away I could tell it was huge, much bigger than a man. Its wings were folded against its back, but I could see they were massive. And its eyes were two burning red coals floating 7 feet above the ground. As I watched, it turned its head toward the house, toward the window where I was standing. Those red eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something crawl through my brain like ice water. It knew I was there. It was looking right at me. I stumbled backward from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Tom, do you have a gun?" "Got my deer rifle upstairs." "Get it. And call the state police. Tell them we need help out here." But when I looked out the window again, the thing was gone. We searched the cornfield with flashlights for over an hour. The state police showed up around 2 a.m., 2 officers who clearly thought we were all crazy until I showed them the footprints. They were in the soft dirt between the corn rows, exactly where the creature had been standing. The prints were huge, at least 18 inches long and shaped like a man's foot, but with what looked like claw marks at the tips of the toes. Whatever had made them weighed a lot. The prints were pressed deep into the earth. One of the officers, a young guy named Peterson, was kneeling next to the footprints with his flashlight when he suddenly went very still. "You guys hear that?" he whispered. We all stopped and listened. At first there was nothing but the normal sounds of a country night. Insects chirping, wind rustling through the corn. Then I heard it. That same low humming sound I'd heard in the fog 4 nights before. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, rising and falling like a giant tuning fork. "There," Peterson said, pointing his flashlight up at the sky. "Look." Something was moving above us, blotting out the stars. It was huge, bigger than any airplane I'd ever seen, and it was completely silent, except for that awful humming. As we watched, 2 red lights appeared on what must have been its head. The thing circled overhead for maybe 30 seconds, those red eyes scanning the ground like searchlights. Then it glided away toward the river, its massive wings barely moving. The older police officer, Sergeant Mills, was already walking back toward his patrol car. "I'm calling this in to the state boys," he said. "This is way above my pay grade." But I was still staring up at the sky where the thing had disappeared. Because now I was absolutely certain of one thing. Whatever we were dealing with, it wasn't any kind of bird I'd ever studied. It was something else entirely. The story hit the newspapers 3 days later. "Mystery creature terrorizes Ohio River Valley," read the headline in the Point Pleasant Register. By the end of the week, we had reporters from as far away as Pittsburgh camped out in town, interviewing anyone who'd seen what people were starting to call the Mothman. I tried to stay out of it at first. I'm a scientist, or at least I try to be. I deal in facts and evidence, not ghost stories. But the facts kept piling up, and none of them made any sense. Dr. Richardson from the state veterinarian's office called me about the dead birds I'd collected. Hal, I've never seen anything like this. These birds didn't die from disease or poison. Near as I can tell, they died from shock, like they were literally scared to death. Scared to death by what? That's what I can't figure out. Their hearts just stopped. More sightings came in every day. The thing seemed to be moving around the area in a rough circle centered on the river valley where I'd first encountered it. A construction crew working on the new Silver Bridge reported seeing it perched on one of the towers at dawn. A family driving home from church said it paced their car for almost 2 miles, flying alongside them at 60 miles per hour, and people were getting hurt. Betty Henderson, a nurse at the local hospital, was driving home from her night shift when the thing landed right in the middle of Route 62. She swerved to avoid it and crashed into a ditch. When they found her car, she was unconscious, mumbling the same thing over and over. The eyes. I looked into its eyes. She spent 3 days in the hospital before she could remember her own name. That's when I decided I had to do something. I'm the forest ranger. It's my job to know what's happening in these woods, even if what's happening doesn't make any scientific sense. I started spending my nights in the forest trying to track the creature's movements. I set up motion-sensitive cameras at spots where it had been sighted. I studied topographic maps, looking for patterns in where it appeared and when. What I found scared me more than the creature itself. Every single sighting had occurred within half a mile of running water, the Ohio River, or one of the creeks that fed into it. And they were all near spots where people had reported accidents or close calls in the past few months. The Henderson crash site, the curve where old Mr. Patterson had his heart attack while driving, the railroad crossing where a freight train had derailed back in August. It was like the thing was drawn to places where bad things happened, or where bad things were going to happen. On November 30th, I was checking my cameras near the old earthworks when I found something that made my blood run cold. One of my cameras had been moved, not just knocked over by wind or an animal, carefully repositioned. It was now pointed directly at the trail I always used to hike into the area. Someone or something had been watching me while I was trying to watch it. I checked the film, my hands shaking as I wound it forward. Most of the pictures were normal. Deer, a few raccoons, trees swaying in the wind. Then I got to the frames from 2 nights before. The first strange picture showed just a pair of red dots in the background, barely visible between the trees. In the next frame, the dots were closer, then closer. Frame by frame, the thing had approached my camera until, in the final picture, it filled the entire frame. I was looking at a close-up photograph of the Mothman's face. It was more human than I'd expected, but wrong in ways that made my skin crawl. The bone structure was almost like a person's, but stretched and elongated. Its skin looked leathery and dark, and its eyes. The eyes were the worst part. Even in a black and white photograph, I could tell they were glowing. But more than that, they seemed intelligent, ancient. Like whatever was behind those eyes had been watching human beings for a very, very long time. I was still staring at the photograph when I heard the humming. It was coming from directly behind me. I turned around slowly, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The Mothman was standing maybe 20 feet away at the edge of the tree line. In daylight, it was even more terrifying than it had been at night. It stood at least 7 feet tall, with arms that hung down almost to its knees. Its wings were folded against its back, but I could see they were enormous. The span had to be at least 15 feet. Its whole body was covered in dark, coarse-looking feathers that seemed to absorb the sunlight. But it was the way it looked at me that nearly made my legs give out. Those red eyes fixed on mine with the intelligence that felt completely alien. Not animal intelligence. Something else. Something that understood exactly what I was and what I was doing there. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then, without any warning, images started flashing through my mind. I saw the Silver Bridge, the new suspension bridge they were building across the Ohio River. I saw it packed with cars during evening rush hour traffic. I saw one of the suspension cables snapping with a sound like a gunshot. And then I saw the bridge falling into the river, taking dozens of cars and trucks with it. I saw people screaming, trapped in sinking vehicles. I saw bodies floating in the dark water. I saw 46 people dying. The vision lasted maybe 3 seconds, then snapped off like someone had switched off a television. I blinked, and the Mothman was gone. I was alone in the forest, standing next to my camera, holding a photograph of something that shouldn't exist. But the image of the bridge collapse was burned into my mind like it had been branded there. I ran back to my truck and drove straight to the state police barracks. I burst through the front door, still holding the photograph, and demanded to speak to whoever was in charge of the Mothman investigation. Sergeant Mills looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I tried to explain about the vision. "Hal, you're telling me this thing showed you the future?" "I'm telling you the Silver Bridge is going to collapse. I saw it happen. Dozens of people are going to die unless we do something." He studied the photograph for a long time, then looked back at me. "This is a real picture? You didn't doctor it somehow?" "I may be losing my mind, but I'm not a liar." Mills sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Even if I believed you, and I'm not saying I do, what am I supposed to do? Tell the highway department to shut down a brand new bridge because a forest ranger had a vision from a giant bird?" I knew he was right. It sounded insane even to me. But I also knew what I'd seen in that vision was going to happen. The images were too clear, too specific to be just my imagination. "At least have them inspect the bridge," I said. "Check the cables, the support structure, please." Mills promised he'd make some calls, but I could tell he didn't believe me. As far as he was concerned, I was just another person who'd gotten spooked by whatever was flying around out there. I drove home that evening feeling completely helpless. I knew something terrible was coming, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. That night, the Mothman appeared to 3 more people. Each time, it just stood and stared at them with those burning red eyes. None of them reported any visions, but all of them said the same thing. Looking into its eyes felt like looking into the future, and the future was full of death. December came cold and gray, with an early winter that seemed to settle over the valley like a blanket. The Mothman sightings continued, but they were changing. Instead of the random appearances we'd seen in November, the creature now seemed focused on specific areas, particularly around the Silver Bridge construction site. Workers reported seeing it perched on the bridge towers at dawn, always gone by the time supervisors arrived. Night security guards quit after encountering glowing red eyes watching them from the darkness. The construction foreman, a tough guy named Bill Murphy, privately admitted to me that his crew was getting spooked. "It's like the thing is studying the bridge," he said, "just sitting there watching us work. Some of the guys are talking about walking off the job." I was spending most of my time now trying to convince anyone who would listen that something terrible was going to happen. I'd showed my photograph to reporters, police officers, even the mayor of Point Pleasant. Most of them thought I was crazy. The few who believed me didn't know what to do about it. The state engineers had inspected the bridge twice at Sergeant Mills' request, but found nothing wrong. "The structure is sound," the chief engineer told me. "That bridge could last 100 years. But I knew better. The vision the Mothman had shown me was getting clearer and more detailed with each passing day. I could see the exact spot where the cable would fail, the North Tower, about halfway up. I could see the time, evening rush hour, when the bridge would be packed with people heading home from work. I could even see the date, December 15th. The problem was, December 15th was tomorrow. I spent that last night walking the banks of the Ohio River, looking up at the Silver Bridge stretching across the dark water. It was beautiful in its own way, a modern engineering marvel, all steel cables and concrete towers. Cars passed overhead in both directions, their headlights cutting through the December darkness. All those people had no idea what was coming. I was about to head home when I saw the red lights. The Mothman was standing on the bridge deck, right in the middle of the northbound lane. Cars were driving right through it, like it wasn't there, like it existed in some other dimension, visible only to people like me who'd looked into its eyes. I watched it spread its enormous wings and leap from the bridge, gliding down toward the riverbank where I stood. It landed about 10 feet away from me, those burning red eyes fixed on my face. This time, I wasn't afraid. I was angry. "Why?" I said out loud. "If you know it's going to happen, why don't you stop it?" The creature tilted its head, studying me with that alien intelligence. Then for the second time, images flooded my mind, but these weren't visions of the future. They were glimpses of the past and of things far beyond anything I'd ever imagined. I saw the creature as it really was. Not a monster, but a watcher. One of many beings that existed between dimensions, drawn to places where the fabric of reality wore thin. Places where tragedies created ripples that echoed across time and space. I saw other disasters, earthquakes, floods, wars, plagues. And at each one, creatures like the Mothman appeared beforehand, observing, recording, learning how human beings faced death and suffering. They weren't evil. They were just indifferent. To them, human tragedy was no different from a thunderstorm or a volcanic eruption, a natural phenomenon to be studied and catalogued. Some of them, like this one, occasionally tried to warn the humans they'd grown curious about. Not out of compassion, but out of something like scientific interest. What would a human do if they knew disaster was coming? How would they react? I was an experiment. The vision faded, leaving me staring into those red eyes with a new understanding. The Mothman had shown me the bridge collapse not to save lives, but to see what I would do with the knowledge. It was studying me the same way I studied birds, with detached scientific curiosity. "You bastard," I whispered. The creature made a sound that might have been laughter, if something without human emotions could laugh. Then it spread its wings and launched itself into the night sky, disappearing toward the bridge. I ran to my truck and drove straight to the Silver Bridge. It was 5:47 p.m. Evening rush hour was just beginning. Cars were backed up on both sides, people trying to get home from their jobs in Huntington and Point Pleasant. I parked at the toll booth and ran toward the bridge on foot, shouting at people to get off, to turn around, to find another way home. Most of them ignored me. A few rolled down their windows to tell me I was crazy. The toll booth operator, an elderly man named Charlie, tried to stop me. "Hal, what's going on? Oughten into you." "The bridge is going to collapse," I said, grabbing his shoulders. "Right now. We have to get these people off." Charlie looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but something in my voice must have convinced him I believed what I was saying. He reached for his radio to call the state police. That's when we heard the sound. It started as a deep groaning, like the bridge was clearing its throat. Then it became a screech of metal under impossible stress. I looked up and saw the north suspension cable beginning to fray, individual wires snapping one by one with sharp cracking sounds. "Everyone off the bridge!" I screamed, running out onto the deck. "Get off the bridge now!" Some people listened. I saw cars making U-turns, backing up, desperate to get to solid ground. But there were still dozens of vehicles on the span when the cable finally gave way. The sound was like the world ending. 800 feet of steel and concrete twisted and fell into the Ohio River, taking 37 cars with it. I watched it happen from the approach ramp, helpless to do anything but witness the disaster I'd known was coming for 2 weeks. 46 people died, just like in my vision. I spent the next 6 hours helping with the rescue effort, pulling survivors from the wreckage, searching for bodies in the dark water. The Mothman was nowhere to be seen, but I knew it was watching from somewhere, recording how humans dealt with sudden tragedy. Taking notes. The Silver Bridge collapse made national news. Engineers from around the country came to study the wreckage, trying to understand how a brand new bridge could fail so catastrophically. They eventually determined that a single eye-bar in the suspension chain had developed a microscopic crack that grew over time until it finally snapped under the load. No one could have predicted it, they said. It was just one of those freak accidents that sometimes happen. I knew better. The Mothman sighting stopped after December 15th. Whatever the creature had come to observe was finished, and it moved on to watch other disasters in other places. The reporters went home. The tourists stopped coming. Point Pleasant tried to return to normal, but I was changed forever. I kept working as a forest ranger for another 23 years until I retired in 1989. I never saw the Mothman again, but I felt its presence sometimes, especially in the weeks before bad things happened. A train derailment in 1971. A chemical plant explosion in 1978. a flash flood that killed 12 people in 1983. Each time, I tried to warn people. Sometimes they listened, sometimes they didn't. I saved a few lives over the years, but I couldn't save them all. The future has momentum, and once certain events are set in motion, they're almost impossible to stop. I learned to live with the knowledge that there are things watching us from the spaces between dimensions. Beings that see human suffering as data to be collected, human tragedy as natural phenomena to be studied. They don't hate us, but they don't love us either. We're just interesting specimens in a cosmic laboratory. Most people would find that terrifying. I found it oddly comforting, because if we're being watched, it means we matter. Our choices, our struggles, our brief lives burning bright against the darkness, all of it is important enough for ancient intelligences to pay attention to. We're not alone in the universe, even if the company we keep doesn't necessarily have our best interests at heart. I'm 85 years old now, and my eyesight isn't what it used to be. But sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch in the evening, I catch a glimpse of red lights moving between the trees. They're always gone when I look directly at them, but I know they're there. Still watching, still learning, still taking notes on the strange and terrible and wonderful things that humans do when they think nobody's paying attention. The Mothman taught me that somebody, he is always paying attention. The question isn't whether we're being watched. The question is what they're learning from watching us, and whether we're teaching them anything worth knowing. My name is Joe Mullins, and I've been walking these mountains for 21 years. Started right after I came back from Korea in 1946, when the nightmares were still fresh and I needed something peaceful to do with my hands. The Jefferson National Forest gave me that peace, or so I thought. I'm what they call a cultural resource protection ranger. That's a fancy way of saying I look after old places, Native American sites, Civil War camps, and the scattered remains of forgotten settlements. 47 historical sites across 3 counties, and I know every single one like the back of my weathered hands. The work suits me fine. I'm good with records, good with maps, and I understand these mountains in my bones. My great-grandmother used to tell stories about our family, about how we came from the old Melungeon people who lived in these hollows long before anyone kept proper records. Mixed blood, she'd say, part Cherokee, part white, part something else nobody could name. She'd warn me about family curses and old spirits that never rest. I always figured that was just mountain talk, old country nonsense from a woman who never learned to read. October of 1967 changed my mind about a lot of things. It started with Dr. Sarah Chen, an anthropologist from the university who'd been studying Melungeon culture. Smart woman, spoke 5 languages, knew more about our local history than most folks who lived here their whole lives. She had proper permits to document burial sites up on Stone Mountain near the Wise County border. That morning when I found her, frost covered the ground like broken glass. The air was so still it felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I'd gotten a call from her research partner. She hadn't returned to camp the night before. I found her body in a clearing I'd walked through 100 times, but something was wrong with the place. The Reese looked different somehow, older and more twisted. The very ground felt soft under my boots, like it was still settling. Dr. Chen was lying beside an old headstone I'd never seen before, though I'd mapped this area twice. Her eyes were gone, cut out clean as you please, and her mouth had been sewn shut with what looked like old hemp thread. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. There wasn't a drop of blood anywhere. Not on her clothes, not on the ground, not even under her fingernails where she should have fought. The headstone was simple sandstone, weathered smooth except for one word I could still make out: Mullins. My hands started shaking then, and it wasn't from the cold. I radioed for the sheriff and the coroner, then spent 2 hours documenting everything with my camera. But when I got the film developed, every single picture came out black. Not dark, completely black, like I'd never taken the lens cap off. While I waited for help to arrive, I studied that headstone. The carving was old, maybe 1800s, but the stone looked freshly placed. The dirt around it was loose, like someone had been digging recent. But here's what really got to me. The digging marks seemed to come from underneath, like something had been trying to claw its way out. Sheriff Hawkins and Doc Morrison arrived around noon. Good men, both of them, but they took one look at the scene and went quiet in a way that told me they'd seen things before that didn't make it into their reports. Gas leak from the old mines, Doc Morrison said after looking at the body. Methane can do strange things to people. Hallucinations, self-harm. But his voice was shaky, and he wouldn't look directly at Dr. Chen's face. They took the body away, and I filed my report. Death by misadventure, they called it. Case closed. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that headstone, about my great-grandmother's warnings, about the way the forest had felt wrong. I'd never put much stock in family stories, but lying there in the dark, I started remembering things. Stories about Melungeon people being driven from their homes, about mixed-blood families who disappeared in the night, about curses that followed bloodlines down through the years, protecting secrets that were never meant to be disturbed. And I kept thinking about Dr. Chen's research. She'd been documenting Melungeon burial practices, collecting stories about their customs and beliefs. She'd been digging into things that maybe should have stayed buried. The next morning, I drove back up to Stone Mountain. The headstone was gone. The clearing looked normal again, just like it always had. But carved into the trunk of a nearby oak tree, fresh as yesterday, someone had scratched one word: remember. That's when I knew Dr. Chen's death wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. 2 weeks later, they came back. Not Dr. Chen, she was buried down in Richmond by then, but other researchers. A whole team from the university, drawn by her unfinished work like moths to a flame. Dr. Michael Torres led the group, a folklore specialist who'd made his reputation studying Appalachian mountain culture. With him came Jenny Walsh, a graduate student working on her thesis about marginalized communities, and Professor Bob Hendricks, an older man who specialized in genealogy and family histories. I met them at the ranger station on a gray Tuesday morning. The air was thick with the promise of snow, and the mountains looked like they were wrapped in dirty cotton. I tried to talk them out of it, told them what happened to Dr. Chen, but they had that look people get when they think they know better than locals. Tragic accident, Dr. Torres said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. But we can't let one incident stop important cultural research. The Melungeon people have been misunderstood and overlooked for too long. I gave them maps, showed them the safe trails, made them promise to check in daily. But I had a sick feeling in my stomach, like when you know a storm's coming but can't see the clouds yet. They set up camp in Miller's Hollow, about 2 miles from where Dr. Chen died. It was a good spot, flat ground, fresh water from a spring, and close enough to the old settlement sites for their research. I helped them carry in supplies, checked their equipment, made sure they had working radios. Jenny was the young one, maybe 25, with bright eyes and the kind of enthusiasm that comes from never seeing anything truly dark. She was excited about documenting Melungeon burial customs, said it would help people understand how these mixed-race communities survived in hostile territory. They were so resourceful, she told me, unpacking her cameras and notebooks. Living between worlds, creating their own identity when society wouldn't accept them. There's so much we can learn from their resilience. I nodded and smiled, but inside I was thinking about Dr. Chen's sewn-shut mouth and missing eyes. The first 2 days went fine. They checked in on schedule, reported finding some interesting artifacts, old pottery shards, metal buttons, pieces of carved bone. Normal stuff for an archaeological site. I started thinking maybe I'd been wrong to worry. Then Thursday morning came and went with no radio call. I drove up to their camp around noon and found it empty. Not abandoned, empty. Their tents were still up, supplies neatly arranged, campfire cold but not long dead. But no sign of the researchers anywhere. Their notebooks were scattered around the camp, pages flapping in the wind. I gathered them up, trying to piece together what they'd been doing. Jenny's handwriting was neat and careful. Found evidence of deliberate grave disturbance. Bones removed and rearranged in patterns. Local folklore suggests protective rituals. Dr. Torres had written, Hendrick believes he's traced Melungeon family lines back to original settlement. Claims connection to current local families. Need to verify genealogical records. The last entry was in Professor Hendrix's shaky handwriting. They're not gone. They're waiting. The blood remembers. I radioed for backup and started searching. Found their trail leading up toward Stone Mountain, toward the same area where Dr. Chen died. The path was clear enough to follow. Broken branches, disturbed leaves, boot prints in the soft earth. But after about a mile, something strange happened. The trail split into 3 different directions, like the researchers had suddenly decided to go separate ways for no reason. That didn't make sense. They were professionals. They knew better than to split up in unfamiliar territory. I followed Jenny's trail first. Smaller footprints, lighter step. It led to a grove of ancient oaks where the air felt thick and still. I found her camera first, then her notebook, then finally Jenny herself. She was sitting against a tree trunk, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. For a second I thought she was just scared, maybe lost and waiting for help. Then I got closer and realized she wasn't breathing. Her hair had gone completely white. Not gray, white as fresh snow. Her face was aged, skin wrinkled and spotted like she'd lived 80 years instead of 25. But her eyes were still young, still bright with terror. I checked for a pulse, tried CPR, but her body was cold and stiff. She'd been dead for hours, maybe since the night before. But people don't age 50 years in one night. People don't die of old age. When they're 25, I found Dr. Torres a quarter-mile away, hanging from a tree branch 20 feet off the ground. No ladder, no rope, no way he could have gotten up there himself. His glasses were still on his face, unbroken. His notebook was tucked neatly in his jacket pocket. Professor Hendrix was the worst. I found him in the exact spot where Dr. Chen had died, lying beside that same headstone that kept appearing and disappearing. His mouth was sewn shut like hers, but his eyes weren't missing. They were still there, wide open, staring at the carved name. Mullins. But Professor Hendrix was still alive. He was trying to say something through his sewn lips, making desperate mumbling sounds. I knelt down beside him, pulled out my knife to cut the threads. But when I touched them, they felt hot, like they were burning from the inside. His eyes were pleading with me, darting back and forth between my face and something behind me. I turned around but saw nothing except the forest. When I looked back, Professor Hendrix was dead, and carved into the ground beside him were 3 words: blood remembers blood. That's when I heard it, a sound like wind through the trees. But there was no wind. A sound like whispers, but I couldn't make out words. A sound like my great-grandmother's voice, calling me home. And standing at the edge of the clearing, barely visible like heat shimmer on a summer day, were people I'd never seen but somehow recognized. Old faces, dark skin, eyes full of pain and anger. They were watching me, waiting for something. One of them stepped forward, an old woman in a faded dress, her hair gray and thin. She looked exactly like my great-grandmother, except younger, stronger. When she spoke, her voice came from everywhere at once. "Joseph Mullins," she said. "Time you learned who you really are." I ran. Don't judge me for it. When dead people start talking, running seems like the smart thing to do. I crashed through the woods like a spooked deer, branches tearing at my clothes, rocks trying to trip me up. Behind me, I could hear that sound like wind whispers following, getting closer. I made it back to my truck and drove straight home, hands shaking so bad I could barely work the steering wheel. My little house on Chestnut Street had never looked so welcoming. I locked every door, closed every curtain, and sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and my service revolver on the table. That's when I started thinking clearly for the first time all day. 4 researchers, dead in 2 weeks. All of them studying Melungeon culture. All of them found in places connected to my family name. This wasn't random. Something was hunting people who dug too deep into Melungeon history. And I was next. I spent that night going through my great-grandmother's things. After she died in 1954, I'd packed everything in boxes and shoved them in the attic. Old papers, family photos, her handwritten recipes and folk remedies. I'd never paid much attention to it before, but now I was looking for answers. What I found scared me worse than the ghosts. My great-grandmother had kept detailed family records going back to the 1800s. Names, birth dates, death dates, and strange notes written in her careful handwriting. Notes about family members who'd died young or disappeared mysteriously. Notes about outsiders who'd come asking questions and never left the mountains alive. According to her records, the Mullins family had been guardians of Melungeon burial grounds for over a century. We weren't just descendants, we were protectors, chosen by the spirits to keep their secrets safe. But somewhere along the line, my family had forgotten their duty. I found a letter my great-grandmother had written to my grandfather in 1923. The spirits are restless again. Another historian came around asking about the old settlements, wanting to dig up the graves and study our bones like we were some kind of curiosities. I told him to leave, but he wouldn't listen. They found him 3 days later, aged to death in Miller's Hollow. The spirits don't like strangers disturbing their rest. You need to teach little Joseph when he's old enough. The blood remembers, even when we try to forget. My grandfather never told me any of this. After he came back from World War I, he'd wanted nothing to do with old mountain ways. He'd tried to make us normal, respectable, modern. But you can't trun your blood, no matter how hard you try. I kept reading, finding more and more evidence of what my family really was. We weren't just Melungeon descendants, we were the keepers of their most sacred sites, the guardians of their dead. And when we abandoned our duties, the spirits had taken over the job themselves. That explained Dr. Chen and the researchers. They weren't random victims. They were threats to Melungeon secrets, eliminated by angry spirits who'd been waiting decades for someone in my family to remember their responsibilities. The next morning I called in sick and drove back up to Stone Mountain. This time I didn't bring my gun or radio. I brought my great-grandmother's journals and an offering of tobacco and wildflowers, like she'd written about in her notes. The forest felt different now, not hostile, just watchful, like it was waiting to see what I'd do. I walked to the clearing where I'd found Professor Hendricks, where that headstone kept appearing and disappearing. This time it was there, waiting for me. The carved name, Mullins, was clear as day, and underneath it were dates, 1847 to 1873. Below that, one line, "She who remembers." I knelt down and placed the tobacco and flowers on the grave. "I'm sorry," I said out loud, feeling foolish but somehow knowing it was necessary. "I'm sorry we forgot. I'm sorry we let strangers disturb your rest." The air around me started to shimmer, and the old woman appeared again. She looked more solid now, more real. When she spoke, her voice was gentler than before. "You look like him," she said. "Like my great-grandson, James, who left these mountains and never came back. Left us to guard our own graves." "You're my ancestor," I said. It wasn't a question. "Sarah Mullins. Died defending our settlement from men who wanted to drive us out because our skin was too dark, our blood too mixed. Been waiting here ever since for family to come home." I thought about the researchers, about their terrible deaths. "Did you kill those people?" Her face hardened. "They came to steal our stories, dig up our bones, turn our pain into their profit. We tried to warn them off, but they wouldn't listen. So we protected ourselves the only way we could." "By murdering innocent people?" "Innocent?" Sarah's form flickered like a candle flame. "They wanted to put our remains in museums, study us like animals, write papers about how we lived and died, turn our suffering into their success. You call that innocent?" I understood then. The Melungeon people had been outcasts in life, too dark for white society, too light for other communities, forced to create their own isolated settlements in these mountains. Even in death, outsiders wanted to exploit them, dig up their graves and put their bones on display. The spirits weren't evil, they were desperate. They'd been protecting their dead for over a century, and they were tired of fighting alone. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "What we always wanted from our blood. Remember us. Protect us. Keep the strangers away from our sacred places. And if I don't? Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then we keep protecting ourselves, and the killing doesn't stop. I thought about more researchers coming, more students and historians drawn by the mystery of missing academics. I thought about my quiet life as a forest ranger, about the peace I'd found in these mountains. I thought about the choice I had to make. How do I do it? I asked. How do I become what you need me to be? Sarah's smile became warmer, more human. The same way our people always survived, by remembering who you are and choosing your family over strangers. She reached out her hand, and against every instinct I had, I took it. Her fingers were cold as winter water. But as soon as I touched her, everything changed. The moment our hands touched, the world exploded into memory. I was no longer Joe Mullins, forest ranger from 1967. I was James Mullins in 1847, watching white men burn our settlement. I was Mary Mullins in 1863, hiding in caves while soldiers hunted our families. I was Thomas Mullins in 1895, burying children who died from diseases brought by outsiders. I felt every generation of my family's pain, their fear, their desperate need to protect what little they had left. The memories poured through me like floodwater, washing away 21 years of thinking I was just a normal man with a normal job. The Melungeon people hadn't just disappeared or assimilated. They'd been driven into hiding, forced to scatter and pretend to be something they weren't. Some had passed for white, others for Cherokee, anything to keep their children safe. But they'd never forgotten who they really were, and they'd never stopped protecting their sacred places. My family had been chosen as guardians because we'd stayed close to the old settlements. Generation after generation, we'd been the bridge between the living and the dead, making sure outsiders didn't disturb the graves or steal the artifacts. Until my grandfather came home from the war and decided we needed to be respectable Americans instead of mountain mystics. When Sarah released my hand, I was still myself, but different. Older somehow, more connected to the land around me. I could feel the presence of spirits throughout the forest, not just Melungeon but Cherokee and others who'd called these mountains home long before white settlers arrived. Now you understand, Sarah said. Her form was already starting to fade. The responsibility passes to you. Keep our secrets safe and we'll rest easy. Let strangers disturb our peace and we'll protect ourselves. Wait, I called out as she became more transparent. How do I know which sites are sacred? How do I know who to trust? You'll know, she whispered. The blood remembers everything. Then she was gone, and I was alone in the clearing with 4 dead researchers and the weight of centuries on my shoulders. I had to act fast. Sheriff Hawkins would be expecting my report, and federal investigators would be coming soon to look into the missing university team. I needed a story that would satisfy officials while keeping people away from Melungeon sites. I gathered up all the research notes and equipment, everything that mentioned specific burial locations or family genealogies. Most of it I buried in a deep hole I dug with my bare hands, but some documents I kept. Sarah was right. The blood remembered, and I suddenly knew exactly which information was too dangerous to leave lying around. Then I called in the deaths as mine gas poisoning. Old coal mines throughout the area had been sealed decades ago, but methane could still seep up through cracks in the rock. It was a plausible explanation for hallucinations, disorientation, and death. The coroner would find methane in their blood and close the case. When backup arrived, I played the role of the experienced ranger who'd seen this kind of accident before. Should have checked for gas pockets, I told Sheriff Hawkins sadly. These old mining areas are death traps. I warned them about staying too close to known mine shafts. The federal investigators came and went within a week. Officially, Dr. Chen and the research team had died from methane exposure while exploring unstable mine workings. All future research in the area would require extensive safety protocols and gas monitoring equipment. The university suspended their Melungeon Cultural Studies program indefinitely. But I knew this wouldn't be the end. There would always be new researchers, new historians, new anthropologists drawn by the mystery of the mountain people. Some might be respectful, genuinely interested in understanding Melungeon culture without exploiting it. Others would be grave robbers in academic clothing, seeking to build careers on stolen bones and forgotten pain. My job was to tell the difference. Over the next few months, I started to understand my new abilities. I could sense when someone approached Melungeon sites with bad intentions. I could feel the restlessness of spirits when their graves were threatened. Most importantly, I could communicate with the dead when necessary, serving as a bridge between their world and ours. It wasn't always about keeping people out. Sometimes researchers came with genuine respect, asking permission instead of just taking what they wanted. Those I could work with. I'd guide them to sites that weren't sacred, help them understand Melungeon history without disturbing the peace of the dead. But when the grave robbers came, and they always came, I'd make sure they got lost on mountain trails, or their equipment would mysteriously fail, or they'd have vivid nightmares that sent them running back to their universities. Usually that was enough. Sometimes it wasn't. The first time I had to let the spirits handle someone directly was in spring of 1968. A collector from back east, some rich man who wanted authentic Melungeon artifacts for his private museum. He'd hired local men to dig up graves at night, offering good money for pottery and jewelry buried with the dead. I warned him off twice, told him the sites were protected and dangerous. He laughed at me, called me a backwards mountain man who didn't understand the value of historical preservation. They found him 3 days later in Miller's Hollow, aged to death just like Jenny Walsh. His hired diggers had disappeared completely, and their shovels were found arranged in a perfect circle around Sarah's grave. After that, word got around. Serious researchers started coming to me first, asking permission, showing respect. The treasure hunters found other places to hunt, and the spirits of my ancestors rested easier, knowing someone was watching over them again. But the job came with a price I hadn't expected. The hardest part about out being a guardian isn't the responsibility or the danger. It's the loneliness. You can't explain to people why certain areas of the forest are off limits without sounding crazy. You can't. Tell your friends why you sometimes spend nights talking to empty clearings, or why you always know when something bad is about to happen. You can't have a normal life when you're connected to the dead. My wife left me in 1969. Said I'd become distant and strange, that I cared more about old graves than our marriage. She wasn't wrong, but how could I explain that I was carrying the memories of 6 generations of my family? That I could feel the pain of ancestors who died over a century ago? I tried to date again a few years later, but it never worked out. Women could sense something different about me, something that made them uncomfortable even when they couldn't put their finger on what it was. After a while, I stopped trying. The job became my life, and the spirits became my family. Sarah visits me sometimes, usually when I'm struggling with a difficult decision. Other ancestors appear too. James, who died fighting off land grabbers in 1889, or little Mary, who succumbed to influenza during the epidemic of 1903. They don't stay long, just long enough to remind me why the work matters. Over the years, I've guided dozens of respectful researchers through safe areas of Melungeon territory. I've helped create educational programs that teach people about mountain culture without exploiting it. I've worked with Cherokee historians to document shared heritage sites, building bridges between communities that suffered similar persecution. But I've also had to stand by while the spirits dealt with those who wouldn't listen to warnings. A documentary filmmaker in 1974 who wanted to dig up graves for dramatic footage. A New Age spiritual group in 1981 who thought ancient bones would give them power. A development company in 1985 that wanted to build vacation cabins on sacred burial grounds. Each time I tried to handle things peacefully first. Each time, when that failed, I stepped back and let my ancestors protect themselves. It never gets easier to find the bodies, but it's necessary. The alternative, letting sacred sites be destroyed or desecrated, is worse than death. Now it's 1992 and I'm 57 years old. Been doing this work for 25 years and I can feel the weight of all those memories in my bones. The young ranger who found Dr. Chen's body doesn't exist anymore. I'm something else now. Part human, part guardian, part bridge between worlds. New researchers still come, drawn by stories of the mysterious mountain people. Most are respectful, genuinely interested in understanding rather than exploiting. But there are always a few who see dollar signs instead of human dignity, who think academic credentials give them the right to dig up anyone's grave. Those are the ones who disappear in the night, found days later with their eyes sewn shut or aged beyond recognition. The authorities still blame it on mine gas or natural hazards, and I let them. It's easier than trying to explain the truth. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd refused Sarah's offer that day in the clearing. Would the killings have continued? Would more innocent people have died? Or would the spirits have eventually found another way to protect their dead? I'll never know. And it doesn't matter now. I made my choice, and I've lived with the consequences for a quarter century. The dead rest easier because of it, and that has to be enough. But I'm getting older, and the connection to my ancestors grows stronger each year. Soon I'll join them permanently, and someone else will need to take over the guardian duties. I don't have children of my own, but there are other Mullins descendants scattered throughout the mountains. Cousins and distant relatives who carry the blood even if they don't know their history. One of them will feel the call, eventually. The spirits will choose a new guardian, and the cycle will continue. It always has, and it always will. Because the blood remembers, even when the mind forgets. Some nights, when I'm walking my patrol through the quiet forest, I can hear my ancestors whispering in the wind. They tell me stories of the old days, share memories of laughter and love alongside the pain and persecution. They remind me that they were people once, not just spirits or legends or academic curiosities. They had names and dreams and families they loved. They built homes and raised children and tried to carve out a little piece of peace in a world that didn't want them. They died defending that peace, and in death they continue to defend it still. That's what people don't understand about the Melungeon curse. It's not really a curse at all. It's a promise. A promise that the dead won't be forgotten, that their stories won't be stolen, that their rest won't be disturbed by those who see profit instead of people. As long as there's Melungeon blood in these mountains, that promise will be kept. And if you're thinking about coming here to dig up our ancestors for your museum or your thesis or your documentary, remember this. The blood remembers everything, and the dead protect their own. Some secrets are worth killing for. Some promises are worth keeping forever. My name is Luther Godwin, and I've been a forest ranger for 24 years. Started back in 1935 when times were hard and jobs were scarce. I was 23 then, fresh from the mountains of Virginia, and the Forest Service was hiring men who weren't afraid of hard work and long days alone in the woods. I've seen a lot in my time. Fought fires that burned for weeks, rescued lost hikers who wandered too far from the trails, watched storms tear through these mountains like God's own anger. But I always believed in what I could see and touch. Real things. Fire spreads when it's hot and dry. People get lost when they don't pay attention. Trees fall when the wind blows hard enough. Mountain folk around here, they talk about the devil's backbone like it's cursed. The ridge runs along the Blue Ridge Mountains, narrow as a knife blade in some places. You can see for miles in every direction from up there. Beautiful country, but dangerous if you're not careful. The old-timers tell stories about Confederate soldiers hiding gold up there during the war. Say men died protecting it, and their ghosts still walk the ridge. I never paid much attention to ghost stories. My job was keeping the forest safe from fire. That's real work, important work. In 24 years, I've stopped 34 fires before they could spread and burn down half the mountain. That's something you can count, something that matters. The fire tower on Devil's Backbone was built in 1947. 60 feet tall, steel frame with windows all around the top so you could see smoke anywhere in the forest. During fire season, we kept a man up there from sunrise to sunset. It was lonely work, but somebody had to do it. In September of 1959, it was Tom Bradley's turn. Good man, careful worker. He'd been watching for fires from that tower for 3 summers running. Never missed a day, never complained about the long climb up the mountain trail. That morning when Tom didn't radio in for his first weather report, I knew something was wrong. Tom was as steady as sunrise. He'd call at 7 sharp every morning, give me the temperature, humidity, wind speed, then every hour after that until sunset. By 10 o'clock, I was worried. By noon, I was climbing the trail to Devil's Backbone with my radio and first aid kit. The trail winds up through thick woods for 2 miles, then comes out on the narrow ridge. From there, you can see the tower standing against the sky like a steel skeleton. I was breathing hard by the time I reached the base of the tower. "Tom!" I called up. "You okay up there?" No answer, just the wind whistling through the steel beams. I climbed the ladder, my boots ringing against the metal rungs. Higher and higher, until I could see over the treetops in every direction. The little cabin at the top had windows on all sides and a door that was standing wide open. Tom was inside, sitting in his chair facing the radio. But something was terribly wrong. His body was like old leather left in the sun too long. Dried up, shrunken. His clothes hung loose on him like he'd lost 50 pounds overnight. His face was pulled tight against his skull, eyes sunk deep in their sockets. He looked like he'd been dead for months, not hours. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that it wasn't hot in the tower. September mornings in Virginia are usually cool, maybe 60 degrees. I could see my breath when I'd started climbing, but all the thermometers in the tower read 150 degrees. The metal was so hot I had to use my gloves to touch anything. I radioed for help, but my voice was shaking. In 24 years of forest work, I'd never seen anything like this. Tom looked like he'd been cooked from the inside out, but there was no fire, no burns, no sign of what could have done this to him. The doctor who came up said it was heat stroke, dehydration, said Tom's body just dried up in the heat. But that didn't make sense. The weather had been cool, and why would all the thermometers be broken? I kept thinking about those old stories, about men dying on Devil's Backbone, about things that weren't natural walking those ridges. But that was just mountain talk. Superstition, wasn't it? 3 days after we found Tom, I was assigned to work the fire tower myself. The Forest Service wanted someone experienced up there, someone who knew what to look for. I didn't tell them about the thermometers or the feeling I got standing in that little cabin where Tom died. The first morning was quiet. I climbed up before sunrise, unlocked the cabin, and started my watch. Everything looked normal. The thermometers read 68 degrees. The radio worked fine. From the windows, I could see the whole forest spread out below, green and peaceful in the early light. But as the sun came up, I started noticing things that didn't feel right. The air was too still. In 24 years, I'd never seen a morning on the mountain without some wind, even a little breeze. But the leaves weren't moving at all. Even the grass was perfectly still, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. And there were no birds, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. The forest was dead quiet in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. Around 10 o'clock, I saw movement on the ridge trail below. A hiker walking slowly along the narrow path. Nothing unusual about that. People hike the Devil's Backbone trail all the time, despite the stories. But this hiker was walking funny. Stiff-legged, like his joints didn't work right. And he was wearing old clothes, dark pants, a gray shirt, maybe a uniform of some kind. Hard to tell from that distance. I watched him through my binoculars. The man was thin, pale, walking with his head down like he was following footprints. As he got closer to the tower, I could see his face better. His skin was gray, as old ash. His eyes were black holes in his skull, and smoke was rising from his clothes. I blinked and looked again. The trail was empty. Nobody there at all. My hands were shaking when I picked up the radio. "Base camp, this is Tower 1. "Go ahead, Luther." "I need someone to come check on me. I think I might be having some kind of problem." "What kind of problem?" I couldn't tell them I was seeing things. Seeing dead men walking. They'd pull me off the mountain and send me to a doctor. "Just come check on me, okay?" But before anyone could come up, the problems got worse. The thermometers started climbing. Slowly at first, then faster. 70 degrees, 80, 90, 100. But it didn't feel hot in the cabin. It felt normal. Cool, even. Then I started smelling smoke. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the forest. No smoke columns, no haze, no sign of fire anywhere. But the smell was getting stronger. Not wood smoke. Something else. Something that made my stomach turn. It smelled like burning meat. I was still looking through the binoculars when I saw them. 3 people walking up the trail. A man, a woman, and a boy, maybe 12 years old. They had backpacks and hiking poles. Normal hikers out for a day on the mountain, but they were walking straight toward a spot on the trail where the air was shimmering like heat waves. Like the air over a hot road in summer. Except it was September, and the temperature was only 70 degrees. I keyed the radio. "This is Tower 1. I've got hikers approaching a dangerous area. Need immediate assistance." "What's the danger, Luther?" I couldn't explain it. How do you tell someone that part of the mountain is burning with invisible fire? That something's wrong with the very air itself? "Just trust me. Send help." I watched through the binoculars as the family walked into the shimmering area. For a moment, nothing. Happened. Then the boy stumbled. He dropped his hiking pole and grabbed his father's arm. The man bent down to check on his son. Then he started screaming. The boy's clothes were smoking. Not burning, just smoking, like they were too close to a fire. But there was no fire, just that shimmering air. The woman ran to help. She reached out to touch her son, and her hand jerked back like she'd touched a hot stove. She was screaming now, too. I was running for the ladder when I heard the sound, like a roar of flame, but deeper, louder, like the voice of fire itself, hungry and angry. By the time I got down the tower and ran along the ridge trail, the family was gone. Not just away, gone. The trail was empty except for 3 small piles of gray ash and some melted metal from their backpacks. The smell of burning meat hung in the air like a curse. I knelt down and touched one of the ash piles. It was still warm, but there were no scorch marks on the ground, no sign of fire, just ash where 3 people had been standing. That's when I knew the stories were true. Something lived on Devil's Backbone. Something that could burn people to nothing without showing a flame. And it was getting stronger. I should have left the mountain that day. Should have radioed for help and walked away from Devil's Backbone forever. But I'd been a ranger for 24 years. This was my forest, my responsibility. If something dangerous was up here, I had to deal with it. The Forest Service sent up a search team for the missing family. I led them to the spot where I'd seen the ash piles, but there was nothing left. The wind had scattered the ashes. All we found were some twisted pieces of metal that might have been camping gear. Could have been a lightning strike, the team leader said. Sometimes people just disappear in the mountains. I didn't argue. How could I tell them what I'd really seen? They'd think I was crazy. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe the loneliness and the stress of finding Tom's body had broken something in my head. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. That night, I went back to the fire tower. I told myself I was just doing my job, watching for fires. But really, I needed to understand what was happening on Devil's Backbone. I brought extra batteries for my flashlight and a thermos of coffee to keep me awake. If something was hunting people on this mountain, I wanted to see it clearly. The sun set around 7. By 8 o'clock, the forest was dark as the inside of a cave. No moon, no stars, just thick darkness pressing against the tower windows. I was sipping coffee when I heard footsteps on the trail below. Slow, steady steps, like someone walking carefully in the dark. I turned off my flashlight and listened. The footsteps were coming closer. Through the window, I could see a faint glow moving along the ridge trail, like someone carrying a lantern. But the light was the wrong color. Too orange, too flickering. I picked up my binoculars and focused on the light. It wasn't a lantern. It was a man on fire. He was walking upright like nothing was wrong, but flames covered his whole body, his clothes, his skin, his hair, everything burning bright orange against the darkness. But he didn't seem to be in pain. He walked steady and calm, like he was just taking an evening stroll. As he got closer to the tower, I could see his face. It was Tom Bradley, but not Tom as I'd known him. This thing wearing Tom's face was made of fire and shadow. His eyes glowed like coals, his mouth hung open and smoke poured out instead of breath. The burning thing that looked like Tom stopped at the base of my tower and looked up, right at me, even though I was 60 feet up and it was dark in the cabin. When it smiled, I could see flames behind its teeth. Then it started climbing the ladder. I grabbed my radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Tower 1, I need immediate assistance." The radio crackled with static. No answer. The thing was climbing slow, like it had all the time in the world. I could hear its hands on the metal rungs. Each step rang like a bell in the still air. I had nowhere to run. The tower had only one ladder, and the thing was on it. I was trapped 60 feet in the air with something that shouldn't exist. When it reached the cabin door, it didn't try to open it. It just put one burning hand on the metal frame. The steel started to glow red, then orange, then white hot. The cabin filled with heat like an oven. The thermometers burst. The radio melted. I could feel my hair singeing, my clothes starting to smoke. I pressed myself against the far window, but there was nowhere to go. The thing pushed the door open, and more heat poured in. The wooden floor started to char under my feet. "What do you want?" I shouted. It opened its mouth and spoke in Tom's voice, but wrong, like hearing someone talk underwater. "The gold," it said. "They come for the gold. I stopped them." "What gold? I don't know about any gold." "Confederate gold, hidden in the ridge. My job to guard it. Forever." The heat was getting worse. I could feel my skin burning, but I had to understand. "Are you Tom? What happened to Tom?" The thing that wore Tom's face smiled again. "Tom found the gold, tried to take it. Now Tom helps me guard it." I understood then. Tom hadn't died from heat stroke. He'd found something on Devil's backbone that he shouldn't have, and now he was part of whatever was guarding it. "I don't want your gold," I said. "I just want to do my job. Watch for fires." "You watch. You see people coming for gold. You let them burn." The heat was unbearable now. My clothes were smoking. The metal walls of the cabin were glowing. In a few more minutes, I'd be as dead as Tom. But I remembered something my grandmother used to say about evil things. They had rules, limits, ways to fight them. I pulled out the small Bible I always carried. My grandmother had given it to me when I started working in the forest. "For protection," she'd said. I opened it and started reading out loud. The 23rd Psalm. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The burning thing hissed and stepped back. The heat lessened a little. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters." The thing was backing toward the door now. The flames on its body flickered like a candle in the wind. I kept reading until it was gone, until the heat faded and I could breathe again. The cabin was ruined, the equipment destroyed. But I was alive. For now. I climbed down from the burned-out tower and stumbled along the ridge trail in the dark. My clothes were singed, my hands blistered from the heat. But I was thinking clearly for the first time in days. The thing that had been Tom told me about Confederate gold hidden somewhere on Devil's backbone. That lined up with the old stories I'd heard all my life. During the Civil War, Confederate soldiers had used these mountains to move supplies and messages. Some folks said they'd hidden treasure up here too. If there really was gold, and if something was guarding it, that would explain the deaths. Tom must have found it by accident while working in the tower. The hikers I'd watched burn must have been treasure hunters. But why could I fight it off when others couldn't? Why had reading from the Bible made it back away? I thought about my grandmother's stories. She'd grown up in these mountains, back when people still knew about the old ways. She'd told me that some evils could be fought with faith. Not just believing in God, but really trusting that good was stronger than evil. Maybe that's what had saved me. Not just the Bible, but believing it could work. I needed to find the gold. If I could understand what was guarding it and why, maybe I could stop it. Maybe I could keep it from killing anyone else. I knew the ridge trail better than anyone. I'd walked every inch of it over the years, checking for fire hazards and dangerous areas. If there was something hidden up there, I should have seen signs of it. But as I walked in the dark, I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. Rocks that were piled too neatly, dead patches in the forest where nothing would grow, places where the animals wouldn't go. About a mile from the tower, I found what I was looking for. There was a gap in the ridge wall hidden behind some fallen trees. It looked natural, like part of the rock had just cracked away over the years. But when I squeezed through the gap, I found myself in a small cave. I turned on my flashlight. The cave was about 10 feet deep and 6 feet wide. At the back, someone had stacked wooden boxes against the wall. Old boxes, rotted and falling apart, but still holding their shape. Inside the boxes were cloth bags that crumbled when I touched them. But when the cloth fell away, I saw what was inside. Gold coins. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Confederate gold pieces, Union coins, Spanish silver dollars. A fortune that had been hidden for almost 100 years. But something was wrong with the gold. It was too hot to touch. Not just warm from being in a cave. Hot, like it had been sitting in a fire. And it gave off a smell that made my stomach turn. The same smell I'd noticed at the tower. Burning meat. I knelt down to look closer and saw something that made my blood run cold. There were bones mixed in with the gold. Human bones, skulls and rib cages and finger bones, all blackened like they'd been burned, but not burned by normal fire. These bones had been cooked from the inside, the same way Tom's body had looked. I counted 3 skulls. 3 people who had found this cave and died trying to take the gold. That's when I heard the footsteps outside. Slow, steady steps on the rocky ground, getting closer. I turned off my flashlight and pressed myself against the cave wall. Through the gap in the rocks, I could see that orange glow again. The burning thing was coming. But this time, it wasn't alone. 3 figures walked up the trail toward the cave. And all of them burning, all of them moving with that same slow, steady pace. I recognized Tom in the lead. Behind him came a man in a Confederate uniform, his gray jacket still smoldering, and behind him a woman in a long dress that flickered with flames. They were all dead, all burned, all serving whatever power guarded this gold. The Confederate soldier spoke first. His voice was like the sound of wind through a fire. "Someone's been in the cave, Tom. I smell the living," the woman said. "Fear and sweat and warm blood." Tom nodded. "He's close. The ranger who wouldn't burn. They were talking about me, looking for me. And I was trapped in a cave with no way out except past them. I gripped my Bible tighter and tried to think. The last time, reading scripture had made the burning thing back away. But there were 3 of them now, and I was cornered." The Confederate soldier squeezed through the gap into the cave. His burning body filled the small space with orange light and terrible heat. When he saw me crouched against the back wall, he smiled. "Found him." The other 2 crowded in behind him. The cave became an oven. The wooden boxes started to smoke. My clothes began to smolder. "You can't have the gold," the soldier said. "It's ours to guard." "I don't want your gold," I said. My voice came out as a croak. "I just want to stop you from killing people." The woman laughed. It sounded like wood crackling in a fire. "We don't kill them. Their greed kills them. Their desire burns them up from inside. But you could stop it. You could let them go." "We are bound," Tom said, "by oath and blood and fire. We guard the gold until the South rises again." I understood then. This wasn't just some monster guarding treasure. These were Confederate soldiers who had made some terrible promise. They'd sworn to protect this gold, and that oath had turned them into something evil too. Hat could never rest. But oaths could be broken. Curses could be fought. I stood up, even though the heat was making me dizzy. I opened my Bible to a passage I'd learned as a child. "Put on the whole armor of God," I read out loud, "that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil." The 3 burning figures hissed and stepped back. "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. The flames on their bodies flickered and dimmed. I kept reading, my voice getting stronger. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. The woman screamed and burst into bright flame, then faded away like smoke. The Confederate soldier tried to reach for me, but his hand passed right through my arm. He was becoming transparent. Only Tom was left, and he was fighting to stay solid. "You don't understand," he said. "The gold is cursed. Anyone who touches it burns. We're trying to protect people. By killing them? By scaring them away. But they keep coming. They always keep coming." I looked at the bones mixed in with the gold coins. 3 people who had died because they'd been greedy enough to steal cursed treasure. But how many more had died just because they'd gotten too close? How many more would die if this kept going? "There's another way," I said. "Let me help you." What happened next is hard to explain. Tom looked at me with eyes that weren't made of fire anymore, just tired, sad, human. "How?" he asked. "Confess your sins," I said. "Ask for forgiveness. Let go of the oath that's binding you to this place." For a moment, Tom's whole body flickered between flesh and flame, like he was fighting against something that had held him for years. Then he spoke in his own voice, the voice I remembered from when he was alive. "I found the gold by accident. Dropped my water bottle and followed it into the cave. When I saw all those coins, I got greedy, started filling my pockets. But as soon as I touched them, the burning started, from the inside out. And when I died, something made me swear to guard the gold, to stop others from making my mistake." "You can break that oath," I said. "You can choose to let go." Tom looked at the gold, then at the bones, then at me. "What about the others who'll come looking? The treasure hunters?" I thought about that. "We'll seal the cave. Make it so nobody can find it. The gold can stay buried until it's not cursed anymore." Tom nodded slowly. Then he knelt down among the gold and bones and spoke words I'd never heard before. Old words, in a language I didn't recognize. As he spoke, the gold began to lose its hellish glow. The terrible heat started to fade. When he finished, Tom looked up at me one last time. "Thank you," he said. And then he was gone, not in flames or smoke, just gone, like he'd never been there. I was alone in the cave with a fortune in gold that no longer burned to touch. But I didn't take any of it. I'd seen what greed could do. Instead, I used dynamite from the fire station to bring down the cave entrance. Buried it under tons of rock so no one else would ever find it. The gold could stay there forever, as far as I was concerned. The Forest Service never figured out what really happened on Devil's Backbone. The official report said Tom died of heat stroke, and the missing hikers were victims of a freak lightning strike. I didn't correct them. Who would believe the truth? But I was changed by what happened up there. I kept working as a ranger for 3 more years until my retirement in 1962. But the job was different after that. I found myself paying more attention to the old stories the mountain people told. Some of them were true. Some of them were warnings about things that should stay buried. After I retired, I became a preacher in a small church near the base of Devil's Backbone. I never told my congregation about what I'd seen on the mountain, but I did preach about the dangers of greed, about the importance of being satisfied with what you have instead of always wanting more. People still hike Devil's Backbone Trail. The fire tower was rebuilt in 1963 with modern equipment that doesn't break down when the temperature gets strange. The Forest Service restricts access during high fire danger, but they think that's because of drought conditions and lightning risk. They don't know about the real danger that used to live up there. But sometimes, on the hottest days of summer, I still get reports from the new tower operators. They say the air shimmers sometimes, like heat waves where there shouldn't be any. They smell smoke when there's no fire. They see things moving on the trail that disappear when they look closer. I tell them it's just their imagination, heat exhaustion, stress from being alone up there too long. But I know better. Some curses take time to fade completely. Some oaths have roots that go deeper than one man's confession and repentance. The gold is still there under those tons of rock. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, I wonder if it's still calling to people, still promising wealth to anyone brave enough or foolish enough to come looking. Most of the time, I don't worry about it. Faith is stronger than fear, and good is stronger than evil. I proved that much up on the ridge, but I still keep my Bible close when I go walking in the mountains. And I still say a prayer for Tom Bradley every night before I go to sleep. Some battles you win, others you just survive long enough to walk away from. The important thing is to remember that some treasures cost more than gold. They cost souls. And once you understand that, you realize that the real treasure isn't what you can take from the mountain. It's what you can leave behind. My name is Robert Hayes, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 9 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was August 1976, the middle of the worst heat wave North Carolina had seen in decades. The drought had turned the usually green mountains brown and brittle. Even the tourists were staying away, except for the brave few who came up to Grandfather Mountain hoping for cooler air. They usually found disappointment instead. I was stationed at mile 305, right where the main parkway meets the road up to Grandfather Mountain. It's beautiful country. Rocky peaks that jut up like broken teeth, deep gorges carved by water that dried up months ago, and that famous swinging bridge that brings in the tourists. During the day, anyway. At night, it's just me and whatever lives in these ancient hills. People don't realize how old these mountains are. The Cherokee hunted here for thousands of years before white settlers showed up. In 1771, a whole family of pioneers got massacred somewhere near the swinging bridge. Nobody ever found out what killed them. The Cherokee wouldn't talk about it, just said the mountains were angry. I never paid much attention to those old stories. I'm a practical man, served as a Navy corpsman in Vietnam for 2 tours, saw plenty of real horror without needing to make up ghost stories. When I came back, I wanted somewhere quiet to heal up. The mountain seemed perfect. In 9 years of ranger work, I've handled 156 medical emergencies. Everything from heart attacks on the hiking trails to kids falling off the rocks. I know every first aid technique in the book, can stabilize a trauma victim until the helicopter arrives, and I've never lost anyone I could save. The mountains taught me respect, but not fear. Most of the weird calls we get have simple explanations. Hikers hearing strange howls in the night? That's just bobcats looking for mates. Mysterious lights in the forest. Poachers with flashlights. Ghostly screaming that echoes through the gorges. Mountain lions, every time. At least that's what I used to think. The first sign something was wrong came on August 15th. I was doing my evening patrol when I found the Miller family from Ohio. They were sitting in their locked car in the parking area by the swinging bridge. All 4 of them, Mom, Dad, and 2 kids, stone dead. Their faces were frozen in screams. The state police said it was some kind of sudden cardiac episode. All 4 hearts just stopped at the same time. Rare, but not impossible, the coroner told me. High altitude, heat stress, maybe a genetic condition nobody knew about. But I couldn't get those faces out of my head. I've seen people die. In Vietnam, I watched good men take their last breath. But I'd never seen terror like that frozen on human faces. Whatever they saw or heard in their final moments, it wasn't a heart attack. I started paying more attention to the sounds at night. The mountains had been too quiet since the drought started. No insects, hardly any birds. Even the wind seemed afraid to blow through the trees. The silence pressed down like a heavy blanket, and sometimes I caught myself holding my breath, listening for something I couldn't name. 3 days after the Miller family died, I was checking the trail conditions near the swinging bridge when I heard it for the first time. A sound that started low in my chest, below the range of normal hearing, then built into something that made my teeth ache. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. When it stopped, 3 dead birds fell out of the trees around me. I radioed headquarters, but static filled the channel. My equipment was working fine an hour earlier. I tried again, and this time, Yet I heard something that made my blood freeze. A whisper of that same sound, just at the edge of the radio frequency, like an echo that shouldn't exist. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the Miller family's faces. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice that sounded like my old sergeant from Vietnam kept saying the same thing over and over. Hayes, you better figure this out fast, because whatever killed them is still out there, and it's getting hungry. The second incident happened 4 days later. 2 hikers from Tennessee, experienced climbers who knew what they were doing. I found them at the bottom of Eagle's Nest Gorge with their ropes cut clean through. Not frayed from a fall, cut, like someone took a razor to them while they were rappelling down. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was their ears. Both men had burst eardrums, and the coroner found brain hemorrhaging consistent with exposure to extreme sound pressure. The kind of damage you see in artillery crews who don't wear protection. Must have been a military jet, the state police said. Sonic boom caught them at just the wrong moment. I checked with the Air Force. No flights over the park that day. No jets, no helicopters, nothing that could make the kind of sound that would burst eardrums from the inside out. I started carrying a sound meter with me on patrol, standard Park Service equipment for measuring noise violations from campers. On August 22nd, it saved my life. I was checking the trail markers near the swinging bridge around sunset when the meter started going crazy. The needle swung past the maximum reading and stuck there, vibrating like it was trying to escape the casing. But I couldn't hear anything yet. Then my chest started to hurt. Not pain exactly, but pressure, like someone was squeezing my lungs from the inside. The fillings in my teeth began to ache, and I felt something warm trickling from my nose. Blood. That's when I heard it coming. It started as a whisper of wind through the trees, but wrong somehow. Too focused. Too intentional. The sound built slowly, and I realized it wasn't coming from one direction. It was coming from everywhere at once, bouncing off the rock walls of the gorge, multiplying and amplifying itself. I ran. Behind me, the sound grew into something that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a roar. It was too big for any animal, too controlled for wind, and too alien for anything human. Windows in the visitor center a quarter mile away exploded inward. The sound meter in my hand cracked down the middle. I made it to my ranger station and slammed the door, but the sound followed me inside. It didn't just hurt my ears, it hurt my whole body. I felt like I was being turned inside out, like the sound was trying to pull my skeleton right out of my skin. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It was the kind of quiet you get in a hospital room after the machines stop beeping, when everyone knows something terrible has happened, but nobody wants to say it out loud. I sat in my station for 2 hours, shaking and bleeding from both nostrils, before I got up the nerve to go outside. The parking lot was covered with dead birds. Dozens of them, all fallen from the sky at the same moment. Their eyes were clouded white, and blood had leaked from their beaks. In the visitor center, every piece of glass had shattered. The emergency radio was nothing but static and that faint echo of the sound, playing over and over like a broken record. I drove down to the nearest town and called my supervisor from a payphone, told him about equipment malfunction, possible seismic activity, gas leak maybe. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. Hell, I wasn't even sure what the truth was. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever made that sound wasn't natural. And it was hunting. The next morning, I went to the local library and started digging through old newspapers. What I found made my hands shake so bad, I could barely turn the pages. 1943. Mysterious sounds terrify grandfather mountain visitors. 3. Dead from heart failure. 1958. Sonic phenomena investigated at Blue Ridge Parkway. Military denies involvement. 1964. Family found dead in car. Unexplained cardiac episodes puzzle authorities. The reports went back to 1771, when the first settlers wrote about the devil's own screaming that killed livestock and drove men mad. The Cherokee had a name for it, but the translation didn't make sense. The sound that eats fear. I was starting to understand what that meant. That night, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of staying in my station, I drove to the other end of the park and slept in my truck with the radio on full volume. Not because I thought the radio would protect me, but because I had a theory I needed to test. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up to static on the radio. But this time, I was ready for it. I turned the volume all the way up and waited. The sound came again, building from that subsonic pressure in my chest to the full alien scream. But with the radio blasting static at maximum volume, something different happened. The sound seemed confused, unfocused. It lasted only half as long, and when it stopped, I was still alive. I had found its weakness. Sound fought sound. Noise could disrupt its attack. But I also realized something that made my blood turn cold. The thing making this sound was getting stronger. Each attack was more powerful than the last, and it was learning. Soon my little radio trick wouldn't be enough. I needed to find out what this thing was and how to stop it before it killed again. Because next time, it might not be strangers from out of state. Next time, it might be me. The attacks started coming more frequently after that. Every few days, I'd find the aftermath. Dead animals in perfect circles, windows shattered for miles around, and always that same aftermath of silence that felt like the whole mountain was holding. Geo its breath. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything I could. Times, locations, weather conditions, anything that might give me a clue about what I was dealing with. The pattern that emerged made my stomach turn. The thing was following the tourist routes. It hit the swinging bridge overlook most often, but also the nature trails and camping areas. Places where people came to enjoy the mountains, never expecting to become prey. On August 28th, it got bold. I was patrolling the trail system around noon. Broad daylight, clear skies, nothing that should have worried me. That's when I saw the Hendricks family from Virginia setting up a picnic near one of the scenic overlooks. Husband, wife, elderly grandmother, and a little girl, maybe 8 years old. I was walking over to check their camping permit when the pressure started building in my chest. My sound meter, which I now carried everywhere, began climbing toward the red zone. "Get in your car," I shouted at them. "Now, all of you!" They looked at me like I was crazy. The husband started to argue, probably thought I was having some kind of breakdown. I didn't have time to explain. The sound started building. This time, I could feel it in my bones before I heard it. Like standing too close to a train track when the locomotive comes around the bend, except the train was made of pure noise and it was heading straight for us. I tackled the little girl and threw her toward their car, screaming at the family to run. The grandmother was too slow. The sound hit her first. She dropped like someone had cut her strings, just collapsed, her face locked in that same expression of terror I'd seen on the Miller family. Heart attack, instant and total. The sound kept building. The husband made it to the car but couldn't get the door open. His hands were shaking too bad from the sonic pressure. The wife was trying to help. Her daughter. But the kid was screaming and covering her ears, blood starting to leak between her fingers. I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out my emergency whistle and the kind rangers used to signal for help, and blew it as hard as I could. The shrill blast cut through the building sound like a knife, and for just a moment the attack faltered. "Drive!" I screamed at the husband. "Drive now!" He got the car started and floored it down the mountain road, tires squealing on the curves. I kept blowing that whistle, fighting the sound that was trying to tear my throat apart from the inside. But the thing I was fighting wasn't giving up. The sound shifted, became more focused, more angry. It was learning to work around my disruption, like a predator adapting to new prey behavior. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a tree, just a tall, thin shadow at the edge of the forest, maybe 30 yards away. But trees don't move the way this thing moved, flowing from trunk to trunk like smoke, getting closer with each shift. When it stepped into the clearing, I understood why people died of fear. It was almost human, but stretched wrong, like someone had taken a person and pulled them through a funhouse mirror. 7 feet tall and skinny as a fence post with arms that hung down to its knees. But it was the throat that made me want to run screaming into the woods. The thing's neck was swollen to twice the size of its head, with bulging sacs on either side that pulsed like a frog's vocal pouch. When it opened its mouth, I could see straight down its throat, and the throat went deeper than should have been possible, like looking into a well that had no bottom. It tilted its head at me, curious, and made a sound like a question, just a little chirping noise, almost friendly. But that little chirp made my emergency whistle crack in half. Then it smiled. I've never run so fast in my life. Through the trees, over rocks, down trails I knew by heart, with that thing flowing through the forest behind me like a nightmare made of sound and shadow. Every few seconds it would make another little chirping noise just to let me know it was still there, still playing with me. I made it to my ranger station and barricaded the door, but I could hear it outside, circling the building, testing, learning. The windows started to rattle, then crack, then explode inward as it experimented with different frequencies. I grabbed my backup radio and tried to call for help, but all I got was static filled with echoes of that alien voice. It was jamming the signal somehow, cutting me off from the outside world. For 3 hours, it kept me trapped. I could hear it moving around the building, occasionally making those soft, questioning sounds that shattered anything glass within 50 yards. It was studying me, figuring out what I was, what I could do. Then, just as the sun was setting, it made a new sound. Not the killing scream I'd heard before, but something worse. Laughter. Low and bubbling, like someone drowning in mud, but definitely laughter. It had decided I was interesting enough to keep alive, for now. When morning came, it was gone, but I knew it would be back. I drove into town and bought every piece of sound equipment I could find. Portable radios, emergency sirens, even a megaphone from the police surplus store. I turned my ranger station into a fortress of noise, ready for the next time. Because there would be a next time. The thing had tasted my fear, and now it knew where to find me. That night, I sat in my station surrounded by radios and sirens, staring out at the dark mountains and wondering how long I could keep this up. How long before my equipment failed, or the batteries died, or I made a mistake that would let it get close enough to finish me. In my journal I wrote, Day 23 since first contact. Entity shows increasing intelligence and aggression. Tourist season continues, more potential victims arriving. Daily. I may be the only one who knows what's really happening up here. I paused, then added, if someone finds this journal, stay away from Grandfather Mountain. Don't trust the silence. And whatever you do, don't let it hear you scream. The final confrontation came on September 3rd, during the Labor Day weekend. The mountains were crawling with tourists despite the drought, families trying to squeeze one last vacation out of the summer. I'd been patrolling constantly, running on coffee and adrenaline, trying to keep people away from the areas where the attacks were worst. That's when I found the historical records that changed everything. I was in the basement of the county courthouse digging through documents from the 1771 massacre when I found the Cherokee testimony. It had been dismissed at the time as savage superstition, but now I understood what they were really trying to tell the white settlers. The thing wasn't just hunting for food or territory. It was feeding on something else entirely, the sound of human terror. The screams of the dying gave it strength, made it more powerful. And the more powerful it became, the more it needed to feed. According to the Cherokee records, it had been dormant for years at a time, waiting for enough people to return to its hunting ground. The drought had brought it out of whatever deep cave it lived in. The heat wave had drawn tourists to the mountains. And I had been ringing the dinner bell with every emergency siren and radio blast, teaching it to associate loud noises with the presence of prey. I had been making it stronger. The sun was setting when I made my decision. I couldn't keep reacting, couldn't keep running. If I was going to stop this thing, I had to face it on my own terms, in a place where I had some kind of advantage. The swinging bridge. It was the one place on Grandfather Mountain where the thing couldn't approach from multiple directions. The bridge spanned a gorge with sheer rock walls. If I could get it out onto that narrow walkway, maybe I could find a way to fight back. I loaded my truck with every piece of sound equipment I owned, plus some special additions I'd picked up in town. Emergency flares, road signal devices, even a few illegal M80 firecrackers left over from my Army days. If sound was this thing's weapon, maybe sound could be its weakness too. The bridge was empty when I arrived, swaying gently in the evening wind 200 feet above the rocky gorge. The tourist season was winding down, and most people were smart enough to avoid the mountains at night. I set up my equipment at the center of the bridge, every speaker and siren aimed outward into the darkness. Then I did something that went against every survival instinct I had. I started making noise. Not just any noise. I made the sounds of prey. I called out like someone lost and frightened, banged metal against the bridge supports, even broke one of my own fingers to get the right kind of pain scream. Every sound designed to attract a predator that fed on human terror. It worked. The pressure started building in my chest before I saw it coming. This time, though, I was ready. I had studied its patterns, learned its rhythm. When the subsonic buildup reached its peak, I triggered every siren and speaker at once. The sound that erupted from my equipment was chaos, sirens, static, recorded emergency broadcasts, all blasting at maximum volume. But underneath it all, I could hear the thing screaming in anger and confusion. My noise wall was disrupting its attack, but it was adapting, learning to work around the interference. Then I saw it flowing up the mountainside, moving faster than anything that size should move, heading straight for the bridge. In the darkness, it looked like a shadow made of liquid nightmare, but when it stepped into the range of my emergency flares, I got my first clear look at what I was really fighting. It was ancient, older than the mountains, older thus, and the Cherokee, maybe older than humans entirely. Its skin was the color of cave limestone, stretched tight over bones that were too long and bent at impossible angles. The throat sacs pulsed with their own phosphorescent light, and when it opened its mouth, I could see rows of teeth designed not for eating flesh, but for shaping sound. It stepped onto the bridge, and the whole structure began to vibrate like a guitar string. My equipment started failing, speakers blowing out, radios shorting out, even the metal bridge supports starting to crack under the sonic pressure. But I had one more trick. During my research, I'd learned something about sound that most people don't know. Every frequency has an opposite, a mirror image that cancels it out. If I could match the thing's scream with its exact inverse, theoretically they would destroy each other. The problem was, I only had one chance to get it right. The creature drew itself up to its full height and opened its mouth for what I knew would be the killing scream. In that moment, I did something that should have gotten me killed. I took off my hearing protection and listened. Really listened, the way I'd learned to listen for wounded soldiers in Vietnam. I tracked every harmonic, every overtone, the exact frequency that made my bones vibrate and my blood sing with terror. And then, using every piece of working equipment I had left, I played it back, inverted. The two sounds met in the air above the bridge like opposing waves on a lake. For just a moment, there was perfect silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of two equal and opposite forces canceling each other out. Then the creature screamed in pain and rage, a sound I felt in my soul more than my ears. It lunged at me across the bridge, but the momentum of its own disrupted attack threw it off balance. I watched it fall into the gorge, still screaming, until the sound faded into the distance and was swallowed by the mountain silence. But even as I collapsed on the bridge, blood streaming from my ears, I knew I hadn't killed it. I had hurt it, maybe sent it back to whatever deep place it came from, but creatures that old don't die easy. The mountain was quiet again, but it was a different quiet now. Not the dead silence that had haunted the park for weeks, but the natural quiet of a forest at night, filled with small sounds of life returning. I had bought us time, maybe years, maybe decades, but not forever. The official report blamed everything on a rare geological phenomenon, something about limestone caves and wind pressure creating acoustic anomalies. The dead tourists were explained as unfortunate victims of heat stress and altitude sickness. My partial hearing loss was attributed to prolonged exposure to natural sonic disturbances. Nobody wanted to believe the truth. Hell, I'm not sure I would have believed it either, if I hadn't lived through it. I kept my job as a park ranger, but I was never the same. The damage to my hearing was permanent. High frequencies sound like broken glass, and I can't hear certain ranges at all. But I gained something too. I can hear sounds that other people can't, subsonic frequencies that most humans miss entirely. It's been useful. 3 times in the past year, I've heard the warning signs and evacuated areas before small incidents occurred. Mysterious animal deaths, mostly, and a few tourists who reported feeling strange in certain parts of the mountain. I tell people it's gas leaks from underground caves, and they believe me because they want to believe me. The thing is still down there, somewhere deep in the mountain, healing, maybe, or just waiting. I've learned to read the signs, the way birds behave, the quality of silence in certain areas, the subtle changes in atmospheric pressure that normal people dismiss as weather patterns. I've also learned that Grandfather Mountain isn't unique. There are places like this all over the Appalachians, ANC, and hunting grounds where things older than civilization still prowl the darkness. I've made contact with other rangers, other people who've seen what can't be explained and live to talk about it. We watch, we listen, we keep the tourists safe without them ever knowing they were in danger, most of the time. Last month, a new family moved into the valley below Grandfather Mountain. City folks from Atlanta, looking for a quiet place to raise their kids. They built their house right on the old Cherokee hunting trail, in a spot where the ground has never quite felt solid under your feet. I've been meaning to pay them a visit, maybe suggest they move their bedroom to the other side of the house, away from the mountain. Tell them about the local wildlife, how sound carries strangely in these hills, how important it is to keep their voices down after dark. But I keep putting it off, because explaining means admitting, and admitting means accepting that some things can't be fought, only managed, that the mountains keep their own secrets, and we're all just temporary visitors in places older and stranger than we can imagine. Tonight, as I write this, the mountain is quiet, too quiet, the way it gets before a storm. My jury-rigged sound equipment is picking up subsonic vibrations that make my teeth ache, and there's something moving in the deep caves, something that's been sleeping for months and might be starting to wake up. I should probably drive down to Atlanta this weekend. Maybe take a vacation, visit some friends from the service, get away from the mountains for a while. But I won't, because someone needs to watch. Someone needs to listen to the silence and understand what it's really trying to say. The Cherokee were right about one thing. The mountains do remember. They remember every scream, every moment of terror, every drop of fear that's ever been spilled on their slopes. And they're hungry for more. If you're reading this, if you found my journal, it probably means I didn't make it through the next encounter. Maybe I got careless, or maybe my equipment finally failed, or maybe the thing down there just got tired of playing games. Whatever happened, remember this. The mountains aren't empty. They're full of things that hunt in the dark, things that feed on fear and grow strong on human screams. And the silence you hear in the deep woods isn't peaceful. It's waiting. Listen to the silence. It's trying to save your life. My name is Michael O'Brien, but everyone calls me Mick. I've been a park ranger for 16 years now, and before that, I spent 8 years digging coal out of these Kentucky mountains. People think I switched jobs because mining was too dangerous, but that's not the whole truth. I left because I got tired of hearing ghost stories every time something went wrong underground. Mick, I swear I heard voices in Tunnel 7, they'd say. Or, something touched my shoulder in the dark. It was always the same thing. Gas makes you see things that ain't there. Your mind plays tricks when you're scared and tired and breathing bad air. That's what I always told them, and that's what I believed. My daddy died in a mine collapse when I was 12. Crushed under 1 million tons of rock because the company cut corners on safety. No ghosts warned him. No spirits saved his life. Just bad timber and greed. That taught me early that the only things you can trust underground are your equipment, your training, and your own 2 eyes. Now I spend my days making sure nobody else dies the way my daddy did. I secure abandoned mine sites across the Daniel Boone National Forest. Seal them up proper so kids and thrill seekers can't wander in and get themselves killed. In 16 years, I've closed 73 mines. Never lost a person on my watch. December in Kentucky is cold enough to freeze your breath, but this year felt different. Ice storms had been hitting us for weeks, coating everything in a shell of crystal. Made the roads dangerous and the mountains look like glass. The old mining towns scattered through these hills were mostly empty anyway, but the weather made them feel like ghost towns. That's when the call came in. Sheriff's Department found 4 bodies in the Harlan County mine complex. Urban explorers from Louisville, all college kids looking for adventure. They'd somehow got it, and into a mine shaft that was supposed to be sealed tight since 1976. Found them 3 days later when their parents reported them missing. Strangest damn thing, Sheriff Morrison told me over the phone. They were in a chamber that was sealed up solid, no way in or out except through a shaft that's been welded shut for 8 years. Looks like they just ran out of air. I knew the mine he was talking about. Black Mountain Coal Company, closed after an explosion killed 47 men. I'd sealed that shaft myself back in '76, right after I started with the Forest Service. Used steel plates and concrete. Nobody should have been able to get inside. But somehow they did. The mine sat on a ridge overlooking what used to be the town of Kohlberg. Most of the houses were empty now, just rotting wood and broken windows. The only sound was wind blowing through rusted mining equipment scattered across the hillsides like dinosaur bones. I drove up the access road that December morning with my equipment in the back of the truck. Gas detectors, structural analysis tools, emergency breathing gear, standard procedure for investigating mine incidents. The ice made everything sparkle in the weak sunlight, but it felt wrong somehow. Too quiet. Even the birds had gone somewhere else. The mine entrance looked exactly like I'd left it 8 years ago. Steel plates bolted over the opening, warning signs posted every few feet. Danger, abandoned mine, deadly gases, keep out. But when I got close, I could see scratch marks around the edges of the plates. Fresh ones. Someone had been trying to get in. I radioed back to headquarters. "This is O'Brien at the Black Mountain site. I'm seeing signs of recent entry. Gonna need the full investigation kit and probably a hazmat team." "Copy that, Mick. How recent we talking?" I ran my fingers over the scratches. The metal was still bright underneath. Not rusted yet. "Within the last week, maybe less." Something moved in my peripheral vision. Just a flicker, like someone stepping behind a tree. I turned, but there was nothing there, except shadows and ice-covered rocks. Probably just a deer. These hills were full of wildlife, even in winter. But as I set up my equipment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness beyond those steel plates. Something that had been waiting a very long time for someone to come back. It took me 2 hours to cut through the steel plates. They'd been welded solid, but someone had tried to pry them loose with crowbars or something similar. Whoever did it gave up before getting very far, but they'd made enough noise to wake the dead. Poor choice of words, as it turned out. The air that rolled out of that mine hit me like a punch to the gut. After 8 years sealed up, it should have been stale and dead. Instead, it felt occupied, like walking into someone else's house uninvited. My gas detector started clicking immediately. Methane levels were high, but not dangerous yet. Standard for an old coal mine. I strapped on my helmet, checked my breathing gear, and stepped inside. The main tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, supported by rotting wooden beams that creaked in the wind. My headlamp cut through the black, showing coal dust footprints on the floor. 4 sets, heading deeper into the mine. The college kid's last walk. 20 yards in, I found the first thing that made me stop and think. A lunch pail sat on a wooden crate beside the tunnel wall. Old-style metal box, the kind miners carried in the 1970s. It was dented and rusted, but someone had opened it recently. The latch was clean, no rust or corrosion. Inside was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple, and a thermos. The sandwich looked fresh enough to eat. I picked up the thermos and unscrewed the cap. Still warm. "What the hell?" I muttered, and the sound echoed down the tunnel like whispered voices. My radio crackled with static. I was too deep underground for a clear signal, but I could make out a few words from headquarters. "Mick, you there? Respond." "I'm here," I said into the radio. "Found some strange things, but nothing dangerous yet. Give me another hour." More static, then nothing. The tunnel split into 3 branches about 50 yards from the entrance. The college kids' footprints went left toward what used to be the main work area. I followed them, my light bouncing off the walls and ceiling. Everything looked normal for an abandoned mine. Rusted equipment, fallen timber, pools of black water. Then I heard the first sound that wasn't mine. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone hitting metal with a hammer. Steady rhythm, coming from deeper in the mine. It stopped when I stopped walking. Started again when I moved forward. I told myself it was water dripping onto metal, or maybe the old timber settling. Abandoned mines make all kinds of noises. But water doesn't keep perfect rhythm, and timber doesn't stop when you stop. The tapping got louder as I followed the footprints deeper into the mine. My gas detector was clicking faster now. Methane levels were rising. I should have turned back, but I needed to find where those kids died. Need to understand how they got trapped in a sealed chamber. The main work area opened up into a cavern the size of a basketball court. Mining equipment sat exactly where the workers had left it in 1976. Picks and shovels, ore carts on rusty rails, support beams that looked ready to collapse at any moment. Everything covered in 8 years of coal dust, except for the equipment that wasn't. 3 pickaxes leaned against the far wall, clean as if they'd just been used. The handles were worn smooth from years of grip, but there was no dust on them, no rust on the metal heads. They looked like someone had been using them yesterday, or this morning. The tapping sound was coming from a tunnel on the other side of the cavern. The college kids' footprints led straight toward it. I followed them, trying to ignore the way my headlamp seemed to dim as I got closer to that tunnel entrance. That's when I found the first body. Jenny Morrison, according to the ID in her backpack. 20 years old, University of Louisville. She was sitting with her back against the tunnel wall, arms wrapped around her knees. No obvious injuries, no signs of struggle. Her flashlight sat beside her, batteries still working. She looked like she'd just decided to sit down and rest, except she was ice cold and stiff as a board. My radio crackled again. This time I could make out full sentences. Mick, we're getting some weird readings from your gas detector. Methane levels are spiking. You need to get out of there. I looked at my detector. The needle was in the red zone and climbing. Dangerous levels. But I felt fine. No dizziness, no trouble breathing. Either the detector was broken or something else was releasing gas into the mine. The tapping stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins. Michael Patrick O'Brien. My full name. Spoken in a voice I'd recognize anywhere. The voice that used to wake me up for school, that taught me to tie my shoes, that told me stories about the old country. My daddy's voice. Dad? The word came out as a whisper. You shouldn't be here, boy. It's not safe. I spun around, headlamp sweeping across the tunnel walls. Nothing. Just coal dust and shadows and the echo of my own breathing. Dad, is that you? Get out, Michael, before they find you. Before who finds me? The tapping started again. But now it wasn't coming from one direction. It was coming from everywhere. From the walls, from the ceiling, from deep in the earth itself. Like a dozen men with hammers, all keeping the same steady rhythm. My detector was screaming now. Methane levels were off the charts. I should have run right then. Should have grabbed Jenny's body and gotten the hell out of there. Instead, I followed the sound deeper into 2. He mine. The tunnel sloped downward, taking me deeper into the mountain. The college kids' footprints were joined by other prints now. Older ones. Boot prints with the deep treads that miners wore in the 1970s. They shouldn't exist. Nobody had been in this mine since the explosion. But there they were, pressed into coal dust like they'd been made yesterday. The tapping grew louder with each step. My gas detector had given up screaming and started making a steady wail that hurt my ears. The methane levels were high enough to kill me if I struck a spark, but somehow I was still breathing fine. 20 yards down the slope, I found the second body. Mark Chen, age 22. He was face down in a pool of black water, but the water wasn't deep enough to drown in. Maybe 3 inches. His hands were clawed like he'd been trying to dig through solid rock. His fingernails were torn and bloody. Jesus, Mark, I whispered. What were you trying to get to? That's when I noticed the wall behind him. Someone had been digging there, all right. Fresh scratches in the coal seam, like fingernails had scraped away chunks of rock. But the scratches were too deep and too regular to be made by human hands. Unless the humans had been dead for 8 years and didn't feel pain anymore. My radio crackled with panicked voices. "Mick, your location beacon just went dead. We're losing your signal." "I can hear you fine," I said into the radio. "I'm following the tunnel system. Found 2 bodies so far." Static answered me, then a voice I almost recognized. "Don't trust the radio, boy. They can't help you down here." I looked around the tunnel. Nobody there but me and Mark's body. "Who said that?" "You know who." And I did. It was my daddy's voice again, but different now. Older, tired. Like he'd been working a 16-hour shift underground and needed to rest. "Dad, how are you here? You died 28 years ago." "Dying ain't the same as leaving, Michael. Not when there's work left to do." A light flickered in the darkness ahead of me. Not electric light. The warm, yellow glow of a carbide lamp, the kind miners used before they had electric helmets. It bobbed and swayed like someone walking. I followed it. The tunnel opened into another cavern, smaller than the first one. This had been a working area too, but it felt different. Dangerous. The ceiling was cracked and sagging, held up by timber that looked ready to collapse. Black water dripped steadily from somewhere above. The third body was in the center of the cavern. Lisa Park, 21 years old. She was standing upright, arms at her sides, staring at the far wall. Her eyes were open but didn't track my movement when I walked around her. She was breathing. "Lisa, can you hear me?" She didn't answer, didn't even blink. Just kept staring at that wall like she was watching a movie only she could see. I followed her gaze and saw what had captured her attention. Words scratched into the coal. Fresh scratches, made with something sharp. But the words were in my daddy's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere from the letters he used to leave me before his shift. "They're coming back. Tell them about the methane. Tell them about the bad timber. Don't let it happen again." Below that, in different handwriting, 47 dead, all our fault. Company knew, foreman knew, we all knew. And below that, more names, dozens of them. The men who died in the 1976 explosion, including Patrick Sean O'Brien, my daddy. "Lisa, we need to get out of here," I said. "Right now." She turned to look at me for the first time. Her eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the whole eye, like they'd been filled with coal dust. "They're still working," she said in a voice that wasn't her own. "They never stopped working, trying to make it safe, trying to warn everyone." "Who's still working?" She smiled with someone else's expression. "The men who died here. Your father, my grandfather, all of them. They can't rest until the mine is safe." The carbide light was getting closer. I could make out a shape behind it now. A man in mining clothes, helmet on his head, tool belt around his waist. He walked with the steady pace of someone who'd spent his life underground. When he got close enough, I could see his face. It was my daddy, exactly like I remembered him, except for the coal dust in his hair and the tired look in his eyes. He looked at me with the same expression he used to have when I got in trouble as a kid. "You shouldn't have come down here, Michael." "I had to. It's my job." "Your job is keeping people safe, not digging up the past." 4 people are dead, Dad. I need to understand why." He gestured to the cracked ceiling, the rotting timber, the pools of methane-contaminated water. "Same reason we're dead. The mine ain't finished with us yet." That's when I heard the 4th body before I saw it. Tom Bradley was screaming somewhere deeper in the mine, high, terrified screams that echoed through the tunnels like a siren. He was still alive. "I have to help him," I said. My daddy shook his head. "You can't help him, boy. He's already seen too much. Just like the girl." Lisa was still staring at me with those black eyes. "They're coming," she said. "All of them. 47 angry ghosts who want their story told." The tapping sound was coming from every direction now. Not one hammer, but dozens. Getting closer and faster, like they were trying to dig their way out of the rock itself. And Tom Bradley was still screaming in the darkness ahead. I left Lisa standing in the cavern and followed Tom's screams deeper into the mine. My daddy's ghost walked beside me, his carbide lamp throwing dancing shadows on the tunnel walls. "You always were stubborn," he said, "just like your mother. Tell me what really happened here, Dad. The explosion. What caused it?" He was quiet for a moment. The only sounds were our footsteps and Tom's distant screaming. "We knew the methane levels were too high," he finally said. "We knew the timber was rotting. Told the foreman, told the company's safety inspector. They said keep digging or find another job. So you kept digging. We had families to feed, bills to pay. You don't understand what it's like to choose between safety and survival." But I did understand. I'd made the same choice 8 years ago when I sealed this mine. I knew there were other entrances, other shafts that needed to be secured, but the company was in a hurry to limit their liability. They paid me to seal the main entrance and call it done. Tom's screams stopped abruptly. We found him in a chamber at the end of the tunnel, a natural cave that had been expanded by mining equipment. The walls were covered in more scratched messages, hundreds of them. Names, dates, warnings about gas levels and structural problems. A historical record written in desperation by men who knew they were going to die. Tom was on his knees in the center of the chamber, staring at one particular message. His mouth was open in a silent scream. His eyes had gone completely white. The message said, "Methane buildup in Chamber 7. Sealing supports failing. Evacuate immediately. P. O'Brien, Safety Foreman." "That's the warning I tried to give," my daddy said quietly. 5 minutes before the explosion, nobody listened. Around us, the shadows began to move. They came out of the walls like smoke, then solidified into human shapes. Miners in work clothes, carrying the tools they'd died with. Their faces were blackened with coal dust, their eyes reflecting light like animals in the dark. 47 men who had been trapped underground for 8 years, unable to rest. "We tried to warn everyone," one of them said. "Tried to make them understand." "The company covered it up," said another. "Blamed it on equipment failure. Said we were careless." "But we weren't careless," my daddy said. "We were murdered. Killed for the sake of a few extra tons of coal that..." The ghosts moved closer, surrounding us. I could smell them now, coal dust and methane and the metallic scent of fear. Tom whimpered but couldn't seem to move. "What do you want?" I asked. "Justice," they said in unison. "Truth, the real story told." "I can do that. I can make sure people know what really happened." My daddy shook his head. "It's too late for that, boy. We're past the point of telling stories." The chamber began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling, and somewhere deep in the mine, timber cracked like gunshots. The whole mountain seemed to be shifting, settling into a new position. "The mine's collapsing," I said. "It's been trying to collapse for 8 years," my daddy replied. "We've been holding it up, keeping it stable, waiting for someone to come back and fix what was broken. I sealed the main entrance. I thought that was enough. Sealing ain't fixing. There are 11 other shafts that connect to this system. Methane gas has been building up in all of them. One spark and the whole mountain will blow." Tom suddenly stood up and turned to face me. His white eyes were full of tears. "They want me to stay," he said in a voice that was barely human. "They want all of us to stay and help them hold up the mountain." "That's not going to happen," I said. "We're all getting out of here. Right now." The ghosts began to laugh. 47 voices in harmony, echoing through the chamber like a church choir gone mad. "You can't leave, Michael," my daddy said. "You're the safety inspector. It's your job to make sure the mine is secure before anyone else enters. The mine is closed, sealed, but not safe. Never safe. And more people will come. More urban explorers, more thrill seekers. They'll find ways in, just like these kids did. And they'll die, just like we did." The shaking got worse. Rocks fell from the ceiling, splashing into the black water at our foot. And in the distance, I could hear the sound of metal groaning under enormous pressure. "What do you want me to do?" My daddy smiled for the first time since I'd seen him. "What you should have done 8 years ago. Make it right." He handed me something. A stick of dynamite, old but still stable. The kind miners used to use for controlled explosions. "Bring down the main support beams. Collapse the whole system properly. Bury us deep enough that we can finally rest." "That'll kill me too." "Maybe. Maybe not. But it's the only way to make sure nobody else dies." Tom grabbed my arm with fingers that felt like ice. "Please," he said. "I don't want to be trapped here forever." The chamber shook again, harder this time. Water began pouring through cracks in the ceiling. We had maybe 5 minutes before the whole place came down on its own. And when that happened, the explosion would level half the mountain. I took the dynamite from my daddy's ghost. "I'll need time to get out." "You'll have enough time if you're fast and lucky." I looked around at the 47 faces watching me. Men who had died because someone else decided their lives weren't worth the cost of safety. Men who had spent 8 years holding up a mountain, waiting for someone to finish their work. "Tell people what really happened here," my daddy said. "Tell them we weren't careless. Tell them we tried to do the right thing." I lit the fuse and ran like hell. I made it to the main cavern before the first explosion hit. The sound was like the mountain screaming in pain, a deep rumble that shook dust from every surface and made my teeth ache. I grabbed Lisa Park and threw her over my shoulder. She was light as a feather and cold as ice, but still breathing. The tunnel back to the entrance was collapsing behind us as we ran. Support beams cracked and fell, sending up clouds of coal dust that made it impossible to see. My headlamp flickered and died, but somehow I could still see the way forward. A warm yellow light was leading us out, bobbing and weaving through the falling debris. My daddy, his carbide lamp, showing us the way home one last time. Tom Bradley was right behind us, moving faster than any human should be able to move. His white eyes glowed in the darkness, and when he spoke, his voice echoed like he was talking from the bottom of a well. "They're free now," he said. "All of them. They can finally rest." We reached the main entrance just as the second explosion hit. This one was bigger, a controlled blast that brought down the entire tunnel system in sequence. I threw Lisa outside and dove after her as tons of rock sealed the mine entrance forever. When the dust settled, there was nothing left but a pile of rubble where the mine opening had been. No way in, no way out. The mountain had finally claimed what was always its own. Lisa came around slowly, her eyes returning to normal brown instead of coal black. She didn't remember anything from inside the mine except following a warm light through dark tunnels. Tom Bradley wasn't so lucky. He spent 2 weeks in the psychiatric ward, talking about voices in the dark and men who wouldn't stay dead. The official report blamed the deaths on methane poisoning and structural collapse. Tragic accident, the newspaper said. Thrill seekers ignore safety warnings. Same story they'd told in 1976, but I knew the truth, and I made sure other people knew it too. I spent the next 6 months researching the 1976 explosion, dug through company records, safety reports, and testimony from the few survivors. Found evidence that Black Mountain Coal Company knew about the methane buildup and the failing support structures. Found memos where executives discussed acceptable casualty rates versus production costs. Found my daddy's name on every safety report he'd filed in the weeks before the explosion. I published everything I found. Newspaper articles, magazine stories, a book about mining safety and corporate negligence. Made sure the families of the 47 dead miners got the recognition they deserved. Made sure my daddy's name was on a memorial plaque instead of buried in a company file. The mountain stayed quiet after that. No more strange sounds, no more impossible voices in the dark, no more urban explorers found dead in sealed chambers. The 11 other mine shafts that connected to the Black Mountain system were properly sealed and monitored. The whole area was designated as a memorial site. But sometimes on cold December nights when the ice storms hit these Kentucky hills, I'd drive up to where the mine entrance used to be. I parked my truck and listened to the wind howling through the trees. And sometimes, if I listen real close, I can hear the sound of men working deep underground. The steady rhythm of pickaxes hitting coal, the creak of ore carts on rusty rails, the voices of miners calling warnings to each other about gas levels and bad timber. The sound of men who never really left their job, even after death. Men who spent 8 years holding up a mountain to keep other people safe. Men who finally got to rest when their work was finished. My daddy among them. I never saw him again after that night in the mine, but I know he's at peace now. The job is done. The mine is safe. The story is told. And on those cold December nights when I listen to the wind, I swear I can hear him whisper the words he used to say when I was scared of the dark. It's all right, boy. You did good. You did the right thing. The dead don't rest when their work isn't finished. But when it is, they rest easy. And so do the living. My name is Clayton Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 19 years. Started back in '54, right after I got home from Korea. Some folks might say I'm getting too old for this job at 41, but these mountains are in my blood. My daddy walked these trails, and his daddy before him. My Cherokee grandmother used to tell me stories about these hills that would make your hair stand up. But I never paid them much mind. Just old mountain tales, I figured. It was late November of '73 when everything changed. The first hard freeze had come early that year, and thick fog hung in the valleys like smoke from a dying fire. I was sitting in my office at Cades Cove, going through reports and drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago when the call came in. 3 college kids missing, Sheriff Tom Bradley told me over the crackling phone line. Been gone 2 days now. Last seen heading toward Cataract Falls. I knew that hollow well. 6 miles in from the main trail, it's a place where the mountains fold in on themselves like cupped hands. Deep limestone caves run through those hills, and the old-growth hemlocks block out most of the sun even in summer. It's beautiful country, but it can turn deadly fast if you don't know what you're doing. What were they doing out there? I asked, already reaching for my pack. Some kind of school project. Research on Cherokee folklore or something. I felt a little chill run up my spine, though I couldn't say why. My grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in my ear. Some places don't want to be studied, Clayton. But I pushed that thought away. I had 47 successful rescues under my belt. These mountains might be tricky, but they weren't supernatural. The drive out to the trailhead took an hour on winding dirt roads. My truck's headlights cut through the fog, showing me trees that looked like ghostly fingers reaching down from the sky. I parked where the road ended and shouldered my pack. My radio, a bulky Motorola HT220, was already crackling with static. The fog always made reception spotty. I started up the trail with my Coleman lantern throwing a circle of yellow light ahead of me. The usual sounds of the forest were muted by the thick air. No owl calls, no rustling in the brush. Even my boots on the frozen ground seemed too loud. It took me 3 hours to reach the area where the students had planned to camp. I found their site easily enough, a small clearing beside the creek that feeds Cataract Falls. But what I saw there made me stop cold. Their tent was still standing, but the camp looked wrong. Not destroyed, exactly. More like someone had carefully arranged everything just so. 3 sleeping bags were laid out in a perfect triangle. The remains of their fire formed a neat circle of stones. Their backpacks sat in a straight line, contents folded and stacked with military precision. But there were no signs of the students themselves. I called out their names, Sarah Chen, Mark Rodriguez, Jennifer Hayes, but got no answer except the echo of my own voice bouncing off the hollow walls. I walked around the camp with my lantern, looking for tracks, for any sign of where they'd gone. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The arrangement of their belongings wasn't random. I'd seen this pattern before in old photographs my grandmother had shown me. It was how the Cherokee used to prepare a site for the dead. I radioed back to headquarters, my hands shaking a little as I worked the controls. The static was worse now, filled with strange sounds that might have been interference but sounded almost like chanting. "This is Whitmore at Cataract Falls," I said into the handset. "Found the students' camp. No sign of them, but something's not right here." The response was garbled, but I thought I heard Tom Bradley's voice asking for details. I described what I'd found, but when I mentioned the way things were arranged, the radio went completely dead. I spent the rest of that night searching the immediate area. My flashlight beam swept across the dark trees, looking for any trace of the missing students. The fog was getting thicker, and the temperature was dropping fast. If they were out there somewhere hurt, they wouldn't last long in this weather. As dawn broke gray and cold, I heard the search dogs coming up the trail. 3 volunteers from the local rescue squad brought their best tracking dogs, 2 German shepherds and a bloodhound that could follow a scent through anything. But when those dogs reached the camp, they did something I'd never seen before in all my years of search and rescue. They stopped dead about 50 yards out and wouldn't come any closer. The bloodhound started whimpering and backing away, his tail tucked between his legs. The shepherds just stood there shaking, like they were looking at something terrible that I couldn't see. "What's wrong with them?" asked Jim Parker, one of the volunteers. "Don't know," I said. But that cold feeling in my gut was getting stronger. Dogs can sense things we can't sometimes. We tried coaxing them forward with treats and commands, but it was no use. Those dogs would not enter that hollow. Finally, we had to leave them tied up back on the main trail while we continued the search on foot. That's when I first noticed the silence. In 19 years of walking these mountains, I'd never heard quiet like that. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no wind moving through the trees. Even the creek seemed to flow without making a sound. The silence pressed against my ears like I was underwater. "You feel that?" Jim whispered. I nodded. We all felt it. Something was watching us. We spread out and started a grid search, calling the students' names every few minutes. My compass, a reliable Silva model I'd carried since Korea, started acting. G up. The needle spun in lazy circles, unable to find magnetic north. I shook it and tapped the glass, but it wouldn't settle. Around noon, we found the first body. Sarah Chen was lying at the base of a massive hemlock, maybe a quarter-mile from the camp. She looked peaceful, like she'd just laid down for a nap. Her eyes were closed, hands folded across her chest, but something was terribly wrong. "Jesus," Jim breathed. How old was she supposed to be? 20, according to the missing person report. But the woman lying in front of us looked 60 at least. Her black hair was streaked with white. Her smooth college girl skin was lined and weathered. When I knelt down to check for a pulse, her hand felt like old leather. "That's not possible," said Pete Morrison, another volunteer. "People don't age overnight." But they do in Cherokee stories. My grandmother had told me about the Nunahai, the immortal spirits who guard sacred places. She said they could stretch time like taffy, make years pass in the space of a heartbeat. I was starting to think maybe those old stories weren't just tales after all. We found Mark Rodriguez an hour later, then Jennifer Hayes just before sunset. All 3 arranged the same way, peaceful, hands folded, aged decades beyond their years. No wounds, no signs of violence. They looked like they'd simply grown old and died where they lay. By the time we carried the bodies back to the main trail, full dark had fallen. The volunteers were spooked and ready to get out of those hills. I didn't blame them. Every shadow seemed to move. Every crack of a branch sounded like footsteps. As we loaded the bodies into the truck, my radio crackled back to life. But instead of Tom Bradley's voice, I heard something else, singing, low and mournful. Cherokee words I half remembered from childhood. "You getting this?" I asked Jim. He looked at me funny. "Getting what?" "Radio's been dead all day." But I could hear it clear as day. A death song, my grandmother would have called it. The kind of song you sing when someone's spirit needs guiding to the other side. The official cause of death was hypothermia. That's what the county coroner wrote on his reports, and that's what made the newspapers. 3 college students got lost in the mountains, couldn't find their way out, and froze to death. It happens more often than people like to think. But I knew better, and apparently I wasn't the only one. 2 days after we brought the bodies down, another hiker went missing. Then another. Both were last seen heading toward the same area near Cataract Falls. The Park Service wanted to close the trail, but the Sheriff's Department needed more evidence. So I went back. This time I went alone, carrying the same gear I'd used in Korea, a .45 pistol, extra ammunition, and enough supplies for 3 days. I told myself I was just being thorough, doing my job. But deep down, I knew something was calling me back to that hollow. The fog was even thicker this time, so dense I could barely see 10 feet ahead. My flashlight beam seemed to get swallowed up by the gray mist. Every step echoed strangely, like I was walking in a vast empty room instead of a narrow mountain valley. I reached the students' campsite just after midnight. Someone had been there since our last visit. The tent was gone, but the sleeping bags were back, arranged in that same triangle pattern. Fresh wood had been stacked beside the fire pit. 3 smooth stones sat where the students' heads had been. That's when I saw my first ghost. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, just at the limit of my flashlight beam. A Cherokee warrior in traditional dress, leather leggings, bone chest plate, feathers in his long black hair. He looked solid as any living man, except I could see the tree branches behind him through his body. Our eyes met across the clearing. His face was painted for war, but his expression was sad rather than angry. He raised one hand, palm out, and what might have been a greeting or a warning. Then he faded away like smoke. I should have been terrified. Any sane man would have run screaming back down the trail, but all I felt was a strange kind of recognition. I'd seen that face before, in old photographs my grandmother kept in a cigar box under her bed. "Grandfather," I whispered to the empty air. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. My breath came out in white puffs. Ice began forming on the creek stones with little crackling sounds. And then I heard the voices. Cherokee words, dozens of them, spoken by men and women I couldn't see. They seemed to come from the trees themselves, from the rocks and the water and the cold night air. I couldn't understand most of what they were saying, but I caught a few phrases my grandmother had taught me. Sacred ground, defiled, protected, go back. Instead of leaving, I sat down on a fallen log and took out my grandfather's tobacco pouch. It was something my grandmother had given me before she died, something she said would help me talk to the spirits if I ever needed to. "I hear you," I said to the darkness, "but people are dying. I need to understand." The voices stopped. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Then slowly they came out of the mist, dozens of them, Cherokee men, women, and children, all dressed in the old way. Some looked like warriors. Others wore the simple clothes of farmers and hunters. A few of the women carried babies. All of them looked at me with eyes full of ancient sorrow. One of them stepped forward, an old man with a lined face and silver hair braided with hawk feathers. When he spoke, I understood every word, even though he was speaking Cherokee. "You have the blood," he said, "but you forgot the old ways." "My grandmother tried to teach me," I said. I didn't listen. "The young ones came here asking questions about our people. They meant no harm, but they brought tools that hurt the earth, metal instruments that cut into sacred soil. They took photographs of things that should not be seen by outside eyes." I thought about the students' research project, archaeological surveys probably, ground-penetrating radar, the kind of tools that could disturb ancient graves. "So you killed them?" The old man shook his head. "We showed them the weight of time, the burden of protecting sacred places. They could not carry it, so they aged and died. It was not meant as punishment, but as understanding." "And the others? The hikers who came after?" "They followed the same path, asked the same questions. The earth itself calls out when it is violated." I looked around at the gathering of spirits, men and women who had died fighting to protect their homeland, children who had perished on the Trail of Tears, grandmothers who had kept the old stories alive, even as the world changed around them. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Help us make them understand. Your people see only land to be used. They do not see the spirits that dwell here. the bones that rest beneath their feet. You have the blood of both peoples. You can speak for us." The spirits began to fade as dawn approached, but not before the old man pressed something into my hand. A small, carved stone, warm to the touch despite the freezing air. "This will let you see," he said, "but be warned. Once you truly see, you cannot unsee." I made it back to town just as the sun was coming up, my mind racing with everything I'd seen and heard. But before I could even file my report, Sheriff Bradley was waiting for me at the ranger station with bad news. "Lost 2 more last night," he said grimly. "Father and son from Gatlinburg. They were camping near Abrams Falls, but their trail leads toward your hollow." I closed my eyes and rubbed the carved stone the spirit had given me. I could feel its warmth through my pocket, and suddenly I could see the mountains differently. Lines of power ran through the hills like veins of light. Sacred places glowed with soft radiance, and I could see the dark spots too, places where the earth had been wounded, where ancient graves had been disturbed. Cataract Falls Hollow pulsed like an infected wound. "I have to go back," I said. "Like hell you do. I'm closing that whole area, putting up roadblocks, posting signs. Nobody goes in there until we figure out what's happening." But I knew roadblocks and signs wouldn't stop it. The spirits were protecting something in that hollow, something so important they would kill to keep it safe. And they would keep killing until people understood. I went anyway. This time I didn't even try to bring backup. I loaded my pack with sage and tobacco, eagle feathers and sweetgrass. Things my grandmother had taught me were sacred to the Cherokee. If I was going to face the Nunahai again, I would do it with respect. The fog was gone when I reached the hollow, replaced by crisp autumn air that carried the smell of wood smoke and dying leaves. But the silence was still there, pressing down like a weight on my shoulders. I could feel eyes watching me from every shadow. I found the 2 new bodies at the base of the falls, Robert and Jimmy Morrison, ages 43 and 16. They looked like they'd aged 30 years each before dying peacefully in their sleep. Their camping gear was arranged in the same careful pattern I'd seen before. That's when the Nunahai showed themselves in full force. They came out of the trees, up from the creek, down from the rocky walls of the hollow, hundreds of them, warriors in war paint, elders in ceremonial dress, women carrying sacred objects, children who had died too young, all the Cherokee who had ever lived and died in these mountains. The old man from the night before stepped forward again, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a woman I recognized from my grandmother's stories. Beloved woman, they called her, a spiritual leader whose word was law among the people. "You came back," she said. Her voice carried the weight of mountains. "I had, too. People are still dying. Because they will not listen. They see only what they want to see. They take what they want to take. They disturb what should be left in peace." She gestured toward the falls, and suddenly I could see what they were protecting. Hidden behind the curtain of water was a cave mouth, and beyond that, a burial chamber older than anything I'd ever imagined. Hundreds of Cherokee had been laid to rest there over the centuries, chiefs and medicine men, mothers and warriors, the bones of my own ancestors. "Your people want to build a road through this valley," she continued. "They want to bring buses full of tourists to see the quaint Indian ruins. They want to put our sacred places behind glass like museum pieces." I felt sick. I'd heard rumors about development plans, about pressure from the tourism board to open up more of the backcountry, but I hadn't known they were targeting this area. "That can't happen," I said. "Then stop them. Use your authority. Use your voice. Make them understand that some places are not meant for the living." "And if I can't?" The beloved woman's expression grew sad. "Then more will die. And eventually, we will have to deal with you as well." I felt the truth of her words like a cold knife in my chest. The Nunahai weren't evil. They were desperate. They were the last guardians of a sacred trust, and they would fulfill that trust no matter the cost. There's another way, I said slowly. What if I could get the area officially protected? Designated as a cultural site. No development, no tourism. Just respect. The spirits looked at each other, having some kind of silent conversation. Finally, the old man nodded. You would do this, even knowing it might end your career? Your people do not like those who side with the dead. My grandmother always said the dead deserve their rest. I should have listened to her soon. The beloved woman stepped closer, and I could feel the weight of centuries in her gaze. If you fail us, Clayton Whitmore, you will join us. Is your word worth your life? I thought about all the people who had died because I hadn't paid attention to the old stories. All the people who would die if this continued. I thought about my grandmother's voice, telling me about the spirits that lived in these hills. Yes, I said. My word is worth my life. She reached out and touched my forehead with one translucent finger. Pain shot through my skull like lightning, and I felt something fundamental change inside me. When I looked at my hands, they were older, lined and spotted like a man of 60. The spirits had taken 10 years of my life as a down payment on my promise. Now you understand the cost, she said. Do not forget. It took me 6 months to make good on my promise. 6 months of paperwork and phone calls, of fighting bureaucrats and politicians who only saw dollar signs when they looked at the mountains. But I had something they didn't, the absolute certainty that failure meant death. I used every connection I had, called in every favor, and told a few carefully edited versions of the truth. I talked about the historical significance of the area, the archaeological value of undisturbed Cherokee sites. I got help from university professors and tribal elders, from historians and environmental groups. I never mentioned the Nuna High. In the end, we succeeded. Cataract Falls Hollow was designated as a protected cultural site. No development, no tourism, just a small plaque at the trailhead explaining that this was sacred ground that should be approached with respect. The deaths stopped. I put in for a transfer after that. Couldn't stomach the thought of staying in search and rescue. Not when I knew what was really out there in the deep woods. The Park Service was as happy to move me to their cultural education program, said my knowledge of Cherokee history would be valuable. They had no idea how valuable. These days, I spend my time talking to schools, groups about the people who lived in these mountains before the park existed. I tell them the old stories, the ones my grandmother tried to teach me. I explain about sacred places and the importance of respecting the dead. Most of the kids don't really listen, but some do. And maybe that's enough. I still hike up to the hollow sometimes, usually around the anniversary of those first deaths. I bring tobacco and sage, and I sit by the falls for a while. The spirits don't show themselves anymore, but I can feel them watching. Approving, I hope. The carved stone is still warm in my pocket after all these years. It lets me see the mountain spirits when they want to be seen. Helps me understand when someone's about to make the same mistake those college students made. I've quietly steered a few researchers away from sensitive areas, suggested they focus their work somewhere else. The official reports still say those 6 people died of exposure and hypothermia. The families got their closure, the insurance companies paid out, and life moved on. That's how these things usually end, with paperwork and explanations that make sense to people who need the world to be rational. But I know the truth, and I know I'm not the only one. There are others like me scattered through the Park Service, old-timers who've learned to listen to the stories their grandparents told. Rangers who know which areas to avoid during certain times of year, which trails have too many unexplained accidents. We don't talk about it much, but we keep watch, because the mountains are full of secrets, and some of those secrets have teeth. The Cherokee knew this. My grandmother knew this. And now I know it too. The hollows keep their secrets, and those secrets keep the dead at rest. As long as people remember to show proper respect, everyone can coexist peacefully. The living and the dead, the seen and the unseen. The believers and the skeptics. But if you ever find yourself hiking in the deep woods, and the birds suddenly stop singing, and your compass starts spinning like a child's toy, and you feel like something ancient is watching you from the shadows, turn around, walk away, Don't ask questions. Some places demand respect, not just from the living, but for the dead. Trust me on this. My name is Clayton Whitmore, and I learned this lesson the hard way. My name is Margaret Dunham, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a forest ranger for 13 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these West Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, mountain lions, lost hikers, illegal hunters, you name it, I've handled it. I have a PhD in wildlife biology, and I know how animals think and act. That's my job. But in March of 1981, something happened on Cheat Mountain that changed everything I thought I knew about this forest. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 5 hunters hadn't come back from their weekend trip. Their families were worried sick. The state police found their trucks parked at the old logging road, but no sign of the men. I grabbed my gear and headed up the mountain. The snow was melting fast that March, making the roads slippery and dangerous. Fog rolled through the trees like gray ghosts. This, high up, almost 5,000 feet, the weather could turn deadly in minutes. I'd been working this area for over a decade. During the Civil War, soldiers fought and died all over these ridges. Sometimes I'd find old bullets or pieces of metal while tracking animals. The locals always said the mountain was haunted, but I never put much stock in ghost stories. The hunting camp was easy to find. Their orange tents stood out against the dark trees like warning flags. But when I got closer, my stomach dropped. The camp was destroyed. Tents were shredded like paper. Coolers were smashed open, food scattered everywhere. But it was too neat, too organized. Whatever did this wasn't just angry, it was thinking. I found the first body 50 yards from camp. Tom Bradley, age 45, father of 3. I'd checked his hunting license 2 years before. Nice man, always followed the rules. Now he was torn open like a rag doll, his chest carved with deep claw marks. But here's what made no sense. He was arranged carefully, arms sparse, id wide, facing north. The other 4 were positioned in a perfect circle around a big oak tree. Each man faced outward, like they were guarding something. Or like something was guarding them. I've tracked problem bears for years. I know what bear attacks look like. This wasn't a bear. The claw marks were too deep, too precise. Some were 14 feet up on the tree trunks. No bear could reach that high, not even standing on its back legs. I took pictures, made notes, called it in on my radio. The static was terrible up here, but I got through. Help would come, but it would take hours on these mountain roads. While I waited, I did what I always do. I looked for tracks. That's when things got really strange. The prints were huge, 16 inches long, much bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. But they weren't bear tracks. These had a thumb. A real thumb, like a person's hand, but massive. And they walked on 2 feet, not 4. I made plaster casts like I always did. Professional procedure, just like I learned in school. But my hands were shaking as I mixed the plaster. 15 years studying predators, and I'd never seen anything like this. The fog got thicker as the day wore on. The forest went completely quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. In all my time out here, I'd never heard silence like that. Something was watching me. I could feel it like pressure against my back. Every time I turned around, the trees looked normal, but that feeling never went away. When the state police finally arrived, they took one look at the scene and called it in as a bear attack. "Biggest damn bear tracks I ever saw," the sergeant said. "Must have been a real monster." I wanted to argue, but what would I say? That something with thumbs had killed 5 men and arranged them like pieces on a chessboard? That would end my career real fast, well, till I knew the truth, even if I couldn't prove it yet. Something lived on this mountain that shouldn't exist. Something smart enough to plan and strong enough to tear apart 5 armed men, and now it knew I was looking for it. The official report called it a bear attack, case closed. But I couldn't let it go. Those men had families. They deserved to know what really killed them. I came back to Cheat Mountain the next week with better equipment. Radio telemetry gear, night vision scope, motion cameras, everything I used to track problem wildlife. If this thing was still up here, I'd find it. The weather had turned nasty. Late snow mixed with freezing rain, making every step dangerous. Perfect hunting weather if you knew what you were doing. I'd been tracking animals in conditions like this since I was a kid, following my dad through these same woods. I set up my base camp 2 miles from where the hunters died. Close enough to investigate, far enough to stay safe, or so I thought. My radio gear worked better from this ridge, and I had good sight lines down 3 different valleys. The first night was quiet except for the wind. I checked my motion cameras at dawn and found something that made my blood run cold. Every single camera had been moved. Not damaged, not broken, carefully repositioned to face away from the trail. Something had found them in complete darkness and moved them with surgical precision. I reset the cameras and added more. If this thing wanted to play games, I'd show it how a professional worked. The second night, I heard it. Footsteps. Big, heavy footsteps circling my camp just outside the light from my fire. They'd stop when I looked up, start again when I went back to my notes. Around and around like a wolf testing a trapped animal. I grabbed my spotlight and swept the tree line. Nothing. Just empty forest and falling snow. But I knew something was out there. After 13 years in these woods, you develop instincts about being watched. The footsteps stopped. The forest went dead quiet again. That unnatural silence that raised every hair on my body. Then I heard something that nearly stopped my heart. Breathing. Deep, slow breathing just outside my tent. Something huge was standing right there, maybe 3 feet away. I could hear air moving in and out of massive lungs. I reached for my rifle, trying not to make any sound. The breathing continued, patient and steady. Whatever it wasn't afraid. It was studying me. I counted to 3 and threw open my tent flap. Rifle ready. Nothing there. But the snow was melted in a perfect circle where something enormous had been standing. The grass underneath was warm to the touch. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Morning brought fresh snow and new tracks. The same massive prints I'd found at the hunting camp, but these led straight to my tent and then away up the mountain. I followed them for 2 miles before they vanished on bare rock. But I found something else that day. Something that changed everything. Hidden in a grove of old pines, I discovered what looked like a shrine. Animal bones arranged in careful patterns, rocks stacked in precise towers, and hanging from the branches, pieces of military uniforms. Old military uniforms, Civil War uniforms. I'd studied enough history to recognize Confederate gray wool, brass buttons green with age. Some pieces looked almost new, despite being over a century old. Others were stained with what might have been blood. In the center of the shrine sat a human skull, polished white and clean. Carved into the forehead were letters, CSA, Confederate States of America. I photographed everything, took measurements, made notes. But as I worked, that feeling came back stronger than ever. I was being watched, studied, judged. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around and saw it for the first time. 9 feet tall, covered in dark fur, standing upright like a man. Its face was almost human but stretched and distorted, like someone had tried to sculpt a person from memory. Intelligent eyes, not animal eyes, but human eyes in a monster's face, stared at me with what looked like curiosity. For 5 seconds we just looked at each other. I was too shocked to move, too scared to breathe. It tilted its head, studying me the same way I studied animals in the wild. Then it was gone, vanishing into the trees without a sound despite its massive size. I ran back to my camp, threw everything in my truck, and drove straight down the mountain. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. That night, safe in my cabin 20 miles away, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen. Every rational part of my mind said it was impossible. Stress, bad light, imagination, anything but the truth. But I couldn't forget those eyes. They were human eyes, sad, ancient, and completely aware. Something lived on Cheat Mountain that had once been a man. I should have stayed away. Any sensible person would have reported what I'd seen and let someone else handle it. But I'm stubborn, and I've never backed down from a challenge in my life. I spent 3 days at the library researching the Civil War history of Cheat Mountain. What I found made me understand why the locals always said this place was haunted. In September 1861, over 500 Confederate soldiers died in battle on this mountain. Many bodies were never recovered, lost in the dense forest or buried in unmarked graves. According to the records, entire companies just vanished during the fighting. One name kept appearing in the reports: Corporal James Mitchell, age 19, of the 12th Virginia Infantry. Witnesses said he was caught in an artillery bombardment that killed his entire squad, but his body was never found. The description matched what I'd seen. Young face, tall build, and according to his service record, he'd been a hunter before the war. He knew these mountains. I went back to Cheat Mountain armed with more than just cameras and tracking equipment. I brought copies of military records, photographs of Civil War, soldiers, anything that might help me communicate with whatever was up there. This time I camped right at the shrine. It came to me on the second night. I heard the footsteps again, but this time I didn't grab my rifle. I sat still by my fire and waited. The breathing started just outside the light, patient and watchful. "James?" I said quietly. "James Mitchell?" The breathing stopped. Everything went completely silent. Then slowly, carefully, the creature stepped into my firelight. Up close, it was even more terrifying and heartbreaking at the same time. 9 feet of muscle and fur, but the face, God, the face was still mostly human. Young features stretched and distorted but recognizable, and those eyes were full of pain that had lasted over a century. He looked at the photographs I'd spread on the ground. Pictures of his old unit, his company roster, battlefield maps. When he saw his own name on the service record, he made a sound like crying. That's when I understood. This wasn't a monster that had killed those hunters. This was a soldier who'd been guarding this mountain for 120 years, protecting the graves of his fallen friends. But the hunters had been desecrating the battlefield. I found their camp again and saw what I'd missed before. They'd been digging. Metal detectors, shovels, bags full of Civil War relics they'd stolen from the graves. James had stopped them the only way he knew how. Over the next hour, using hand signals and simple words, I managed to communicate with him. He was trapped here, unable to die, unable to leave. The trauma of battle had changed him into something between man and beast. He showed me the graves, dozens of unmarked burial sites scattered through the forest. His friends, his brothers, sleeping forever in the mountain soil. He'd been protecting them all this time, keeping treasure hunters and vandals away. But something else was happening to him. The years of isolation and grief were making him more animal, less human. He was losing himself piece by piece, and he knew it. That's when he told me why he'd revealed himself to me. He needed help. Not to be killed or captured, but to be remembered. To have his story told so his vigil would mean something. I promised him I'd do everything I could. But then we heard the voices. 3 men were climbing up from the valley, metal detectors beeping, laughing about all the Confederate gold they were going to find. Another treasure hunting party drawn by news reports of the bear attack. James changed right before my eyes. The human intelligence faded from his face, replaced by pure animal rage. His muscles swelled, his claws extended, and he let out a roar that shook the trees. He was about to kill again. I had seconds to choose. Let him slaughter 3 more people, or try to stop a creature that could tear me apart without effort. "James, stop!" I shouted, stepping between him and the sound of approaching voices. He froze, confusion flickering across his distorted features. For a moment, the human awareness returned to his eyes. "They don't know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're just treasure hunters. Greedy but not evil. You don't have to kill them." The voices were getting closer. I could hear branches breaking, the metallic beeping of their detectors. They'd be in the clearing in minutes. James shook his massive head, struggling with emotions that had been building for over a century. The beast wanted blood. The soldier wanted justice. The man just wanted peace. "Let me handle this," I said. "Trust me." He stared at me for a long moment, then stepped back into the shadows. But I could feel him watching, ready to strike if things went wrong. The three treasure hunters broke into the clearing like they owned the place. City boys with expensive equipment and no respect for where they were. The kind of people who saw dollar signs instead of history. "You need to leave," I told them, stepping into their path. This is a protected area." "Says who?" The leader was a big man with a beer gut and an attitude. "This is public land, lady. We got every right to be here." I showed them my ranger badge. "This is an active crime scene. 5 people died here last week." "Yeah, we heard about the bear attack," one of them said. "That's why we brought guns." He patted a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Besides, we already found some good stuff down the hill." They dumped a bag on the ground. Civil War buttons, belt buckles, pieces of equipment, all stolen from the graves of dead soldiers. I felt James's presence shift in the darkness. The temperature around us dropped 10 degrees. "You don't understand," I said. "Those belongings are from a battlefield cemetery. You're grave robbing." "Finders keepers," the fat man laughed. "These boys been dead over 100 years. They ain't using this stuff anymore." That's when James stepped into the firelight. The 3 men went silent, their faces white with terror. One dropped his metal detector. Another started praying under his breath. "Jesus Christ," the leader whispered. "What is that thing?" "That," I said, "is Corporal James Mitchell of the 12th Virginia Infantry. He's been guarding this mountain since 1861, protecting the graves of his fellow soldiers, the men you've been robbing." James stood perfectly still, but his eyes were locked on the bag of stolen artifacts. His breathing was getting heavier, more animalistic. "You have 2 choices," I continued. "Put everything back where you found it and leave this mountain forever, or find out why 5 hunters died here last week." The men didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed the bag and started pulling out artifacts, placing them carefully on the ground. Their hands were shaking so hard they could barely hold anything. "We're sorry," one of them said. "We didn't know. We'll put it all." "Well, back, I swear." But the leader wasn't giving up so easily. "I ain't afraid of no ghost story," he said, raising his rifle. "This is just some freak in a costume." He fired. The bullet hit James in the chest and passed right through without slowing him down. The wound closed instantly, like it had never existed. James roared, a sound that shook snow from the trees and sent every animal within miles running for cover. Then he charged. What happened next took maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like hours. James moved faster than anything that big had a right to move. He grabbed the shooter by the throat and lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. The other 2 men ran screaming into the forest. "James, don't!" I shouted. He stopped, the man dangling from his claws, feet kicking helplessly. For a moment I thought he was going to kill him anyway. Then, very carefully, he set the man down. The treasure hunter collapsed, gasping and crying. "I'm sorry," he wheezed. "I'm so sorry." James looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Peace. Understanding. The human part of him was winning, at least for now. He pointed at the artifacts scattered on the ground, then at the man. The message was clear. Put them back and leave. The man nodded frantically, gathering up the stolen items with shaking hands. Then he ran after his friends, crashing through the undergrowth like a scared deer. When they were gone, James sat down heavily by the fire. The effort of controlling himself had drained him. He looked older, somehow, more tired. "Thank you," I said. He nodded once, then stood and walked back toward the shrine. But before he disappeared into the darkness, he turned and looked at me one last time. I knew what he was asking. I'd made him a promise. "I'll tell your story," I said. "I'll make sure people remember." He smiled, actually smiled, and then he was gone. I kept my promise to James Mitchell. It took me 3 years to convince the state government to designate Cheat Mountain as a protected Civil War battlefield. 3 years of me, eatings, reports, and fighting bureaucrats who didn't understand why an old battlefield mattered. But I had help. The 3 treasure hunters I'd encountered became my strongest supporters. After what they'd seen, they spent their own money helping me research the site and push for protection. The memorial was dedicated in 1984, a simple stone marker listing the names of all the soldiers who died on the mountain, including Corporal James Mitchell of the 12th Virginia Infantry. Officially, his body was never recovered. Unofficially, I knew exactly where he was. I still work these mountains, but I'm different now. What I saw changed how I understand the world. There are things science can't explain, wounds so deep they transform the very soul. Sometimes late at night when I'm patrolling the battlefield, I catch a glimpse of movement in the trees, a shadow that's too tall, too broad to be human. But the presence doesn't feel threatening anymore. It feels grateful. The treasure hunting stopped completely after word spread about what happened to those men. Oh, people still come to visit the memorial, but they're respectful now. They bring flowers, take pictures, say prayers for the dead. James got what he wanted. His vigil finally means something. But I know he's still up there, still watching, still protecting his fallen brothers. And sometimes on quiet nights when the fog rolls through the trees, I swear I can hear the sound of a soldier's boots patrolling his eternal post, keeping watch over the mountain where so many brave men gave their lives. The locals still say Cheat Mountain is haunted. They're right. But it's haunted by love, not evil, by loyalty that death couldn't break, by a promise kept for over a century. Some wounds run so deep they transform the very soul. But sometimes, if we're very lucky, they transform it into something beautiful.